Hello, hello, hello. Sorry for the 10 seconds of silence. I was experiencing a technical issue with my stream, but I'm trying to fix it now and tell everybody that we're here and go live and time and all that stuff. So, parasocial love to you and yours as we're going live. I'm going to post on Twitter and on Discord that I am live so we can get some more coolio human beings. We are live on Valor Media. Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith and the news! Exclamation point. Post. Then go here. And then maybe later. And then Discord. Sorry for the technical shenanigans. We're trying out like 10 different things. My apologies. But I hope you're having a great day. Tell me how big of a day you're having, how good of a day you're having, and then shortly we'll get into the content. All right, cool. I posted it. Oh, actually, sorry, one more place. My other YouTube channel. Sorry for the shenanigans. My earnest apologies. Working through some tech issues, but I parasocially love you for being here. Then create post. Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith plus news. Post. Reply. Link. Go. All right, cool. All right, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, I'm back. I'm back. Christian Blair started a new job. Not too busy. Your combo with J-Stock was cancer. My apologies. Now, I want to keep, relatively speaking, the drama Twitch and YouTube political community has not been good to me. What I would say is that J-Stock, Diggers, Mrau, Queeman, all those people, they kind of like to use me as a vector through which to A-log Destiny. But whatever. Like okay, so I go onto a conversation. You kind of have to zoom it out, right? All the YouTube drama people, they'll be like, "Oh, Connor is sweeping for this terrible human being, and we all have to pearl clutch and burp. That might not be the creators, but that definitely is the audience, and they'll complain about it. But at the end of the day, what are we doing? We are having a conversation about morality and philosophy and first principles with someone who was caught in a lurid drama, right? Who cares? Right? It's not that big of a deal. Gen X says, yo, and I say yo back. What's up? So believe it or not, the reason why we got taken out on Friday was actually Joe Rogan, which is funny because there's a whole bunch of reactions and breakdowns to Joe Rogan. We might get taken down again today, and it is going to be a shorter stream. I have to leave for an all hands meeting at 3 p.m. But what we will be doing is we'll be breaking down the news. We'll be starting Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith again, seeing if we can get through more of the content. If we get taken down, then I'll actually pause the content. I'll let it come back live, and then we'll just go watch Tim Pool. So if we do get taken out, please tell me, and then I'll just hang out for a couple of minutes until we actually are back up and we can react to more content. Whick did go on to Tim Pool with Lactoid in order to debate the Ukraine war. And I think he had some pretty strong neoliberal, neoconservative takes. However, I do just want to see it because, frankly, I think that Lactoid is a competent enough debater. And then Tim Pool was obviously getting very passionate. So at the very least, we'll get some lulls out of it. So without further ado, let's break into the news. Just because it's a shorter show today, I might be going through the headlines more than I'm going through like the actual body of the story, just because I want to respect your time and kind of get into the content. So let's share the entire screen. Let's put in some volume. Let's put in some news. Christian Blair says he hired a company that purposely strikes any channel that has his and other comics content. That sucks. So we might, it was like Wham Bam Media or something like that. It was something very silly. But if Wham Bam Media, if we start, because we got through like 40 minutes, or excuse me, I guess we got through 20 minutes of the content. But if we get through 20 minutes of the content and then we get taken down, we'll just come back up. It's fine. No problems. Add to stage. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at this because it is important and it is relevant and I want to stay apprised of it. But Trump's showdown with China deepens with huge stakes for the economy. China might not blink, and we might blink first. So President Donald Trump is heading into another volatile week of his trade wars, facing an urgent need to de-escalate the clash he ignited with China before it inflicts deep damage on the U.S. economy. Chinese President Xi Jinping is so far declining U.S. pressure to call his American counterpart to seek a deal after the United States imposed 145% tariffs on its superpower rival, setting off a long-feared direct confrontation. This leaves Trump repeatedly assuring Americans that his great relationship with the Chinese leader will head off a crisis, but unable to initiate talks in a standoff that risks tanking stock markets again and imposing real hardship on Americans. So this is where, Trump being the 4D genius, the 4D chess playing genius, is absolutely falling apart, where he's like, I have a great relationship with Putin. I have a great relationship with Russia. There's no reason for the Ukraine war to continue. So let's go ahead and have a ceasefire. Then a ceasefire is signed by both parties. And then Russia violates the ceasefire and there's no consequences. And they're still negotiating going ahead. So in my opinion, we don't have a 4D chess player. We just have a rube dummy arsler who's running the presidency, right? Then same thing with the trade war. China very easily could back off and say, okay, we'll do some things in order to negotiate our trade imbalance, and we'll go ahead and drop all of our tariffs. However, that would be deferring to Trump being a bully. And so as a result, they actually have a political opportunity in order to stand up to the United States on the world stage and show that they can be a leader on the world stage. So while everybody dislikes China, they dislike, I don't know, the Uyghur at minimum cultural genocide. They dislike the disfavorable trade practices. They dislike them trying to reestablish the tributary relationship they have with South Asia. Everyone dislikes that. But the truth is, if the United States is being worse than China on the international stage when it comes to trade, then China has a political opportunity to see some leadership. And that's exactly what they want. So Trump being a moron has screwed over us, screwed over our soft power, screwed over our hard power, and given China an international political opportunity. Eon Flux is doing like a super sticker, which is a waving hand with headphones on it. Well, hello, Eon Flux. Good to see you. Lido Vexer says, really feels like Trump is just giving gift after gift that's bad to China. Yeah, I agree. 100%. Gift bag, B-A-G. Got it. Giving a gift bag to China. Agreed. I don't know if it's, actually, I do know. I think he's just stupid. So I know that's like very unsophisticated of me to say that the president of the United States, who's the most powerful person on the planet, is dumb and he's doing dumb things. However, that's my genuine opinion. I literally think that there isn't a broader plan. I think he's just a dog chasing cars, effectively. Typing is hard, Lido Vexer. Typing is hard, I agree. Toxic Holy Grenade, THG says, more like moron puts, lol. True. It's a PG-13 show, so we got to keep our insults PG-13. Sean Kaplan says, howdy, I'll be lurking today. Have a great stream, Connor. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for dropping by. I do appreciate it. Please, everyone remember to like the stream. That way other people know that we're live. But let's go ahead and check this out. This specific element of the trade war that's affecting the farmer. U.S. presidential Donald Trump has imposed an additional 145% tariff on all Chinese imports, despite pausing his reciprocal levies on all of the countries in a stunning reversal last week. But China is not backing down, saying it will fight to the end if Trump continues to escalate what is already becoming a full-blown trade war. On Friday, China also significantly ramped up its own duties on U.S. imports into the country. To analyze which nation might blink first, CNN examined China's largest imports from the United States, soybeans, to see if and how that demand could be met elsewhere, what U.S. farmers stand to lose, and more. Both countries are deeply intertwined with each other on trade, though China sells about 3 times more than the U.S. buys. The result is a significant trade deficit amounting to almost $300 billion in China's favor, a gap that Trump wants to close with tariffs. China buys mainly agricultural products from the U.S., including soybeans, oilseeds, and grains. Soybean imports, mostly used for animal feed, already took a hit during Trump's first term when the two countries sparred in an earlier trade war. At the time, China sought to diversify the source of its imports and look to other countries for more agricultural products. It's set to do that again after imposing 125% tariffs on all U.S. imports, a move analysts expect could send China's imports of American cultural commodities, or agricultural commodities, close to zero. And so this is what's crazy, pants, is that because we already have a trade deficit and we started the trade war, and Trump doesn't have a substantive off-ramp, we're talking about, like, I don't know, billions of dollars that might disappear as a result of Trump's actions. And Trump is going to have to subsidize the farmers to keep them from going belly up. It's very dumb. That's the best that I can say. I wish I had more astute and insightful analysis, but I think when something's dumb, you just have to say it's dumb. Sean Kaplan says, busy with last minute taxes. Well, very based. I'm happy that you're taking care of that. Doom Spiral says, I half expect Trump to negotiate a truce with Russia where the U.S. withdraws from NATO. I would say very spicy things on Twitter if that happens. I'll put it that way. Seraph702 says, morning, ladies and gents. Well, good morning to you, Seraph. Good to have you aboard. Please remember to like the stream. Doom Spiral says, as a part of the Ukraine war. Yeah. I'll be saying very spicy things on Twitter if that's a thing. THG says, to be fair, the CCP is the one that is hated as opposed to China itself, though it's very dangerous to visit there. Yeah. You can hate the Chinese government without necessarily hating China as a whole. I agree with that assessment. Some top tech leaders have embraced Trump. That's created a political divide in Silicon Valley. I'll actually have personal insight that I'm going to add to the story real quick, but I want to see what they're saying. San Jose, California, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, despite having some of the worst politics on the planet. Like many in the tech industry, Jeremy Lyons used to think of himself as a relatively apolitical guy. The only time he had participated in a demonstration before now was in the opening days of Donald Trump's first presidential term when he joined fellow Google workers walking out of the company's Silicon Valley campus to protest immigration restrictions. Last weekend was Lyons' second, also against Trump, but had a very different feel. The man directing thousands of marchers with a bullhorn in downtown San Jose on April 5th was another tech worker who would not give his full name for fear of being identified by Trump's backers. Marchers were urged not to harass drivers of Tesla vehicles, which have gone from a symbol of Silicon Valley's environmental futurism to a pro-Trump icon. So I'm just going to share what I was told when I was in D.C. So what I was told when I was in D.C. was that a decade ago or 15 years ago, it was unthinkable to be a Republican supporter, let alone a MAGA supporter in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was largely Democrat, largely progressive, right? To the point that they actually had some pretty crazy school reforms that actually got, I don't know, kicked back by the community. But what happened in the past decade is that unironic fascists, now bear in mind, I am repeating what somebody said. I don't know how accurate it is. There is a group surrounding Thiel and a group surrounding Curtis Yarvin that is popular in both New York and San Francisco. And they're dissident, right-wing, unapologetic, actual philosophical fascists. And they wanted to infiltrate the MAGA movement in order to seize their own level of political power. And so they were part of what was responsible for backing J.D. Vance of the vice presidency. And so they backed Vance into MAGA in order to get as much deregulation as they could. And so as a result, they have an outsized influence in the new Trump administration. That's what was told to me in DC. So if you see Trump buying $100 billion worth of Bitcoin, if you see, and using the Treasury to do it, if you see Trump exempting tech imports from tariffs, if you see Trump playing footsie with people from San Francisco who are big tech moguls, the reason why that's happening is because they substantively backed his campaign in order to get a foothold in the MAGA movement. So just wanted to share that. THG says, speaking of Donald Trump, I did some digging about came VA Cross Greg Polis, an American reporter of The Guardian, and he did some very good research that Donald Trump rigged the election, votes excluded. Well, you'd have to tell me more about it, to be honest. Excuse the grammar. No problem. Gen X says they did infiltrate. The QAnon sense stuff was used by them too. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all by that as well. Isn't it so funny? Just taking a breath and kind of thinking out loud for a second. Isn't it so funny that we had a messianic Trump cult that believed that like RFK Jr. was going to, I think it was actually supposed to be a Kennedy who had died, was going to reveal himself to be a deep state infiltrator and then arrest all of the members of the deep state and Democrat Party who had prevented Trump's agenda in a holy day of reckoning. And then that just didn't happen. And all of the QAnoners just disappeared. Like, at what point, if you're like a member of one of these like schizo right-wing groups and then your messianic cult doesn't happen, at what point do you just say, okay, that was psychotic. I was wrong. My bad. Right? JFK Jr. says Gen X. They still believe that on Telegram. Yeah, that's crazy pants. So at what point, like if we get past the second Trump presidency, then the deep state seizes power again, and there's no arrests and there's no purges of the federal government. What do the QAnoners say then? Because they've had 2 shots at purging the government of all these traitors to Trump's agenda, right? And they just haven't taken it. Well, QC John says, good afternoon, Connor and chat. Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. Good to see all the regular faces. Sultan Al Fahim says, what? And you heard me. So, I would only join the sex cult, says Sultan Al Fahim. Indeed. Indeed. You should try to join Nexium or whatever that cult was that got ripped apart, who had Allison Mack from the TV show Smallville. I always thought that she was don't tell my wife, but I thought Allison Mack was cute. So hold on. I'm just going to show you just for the memes. She joined a sex cult in New York that recruited a bunch of women into pursuing, relationships with each other and recruiting other women into the organization. And then also doing sex favors for the cult leader. And so she got sentenced to 3 years for recruiting for this cult named after a pill that helps with your stomach, which is sad. It's sad. She was a pretty successful actor in Smallville. She was like one of Clark Kent's not side chicks. That's rude. She was one of Clark Kent's sidekicks. And yeah, she was a good looking gal. So it's sad that she got sucked into a sex cult and then became a abuser and a recruiter of the sex cult. But this was like peak thousands aesthetic right there. Sad. God forbid a girl have Oh, Lido Vexer in with the spicy comment. Good Lord. Christian Blair says, I too like watching shows where 40-year-old actors play high school students. Yeah, me as well. THG says, the only problem is that other independent outlets like Midas Touch didn't invite Greg Palast onto the show and doing an interview with him regarding all this. That would be insightful. Well, maybe if there's meat on the bone, we'll take a look at it. Well, QC John says, wasn't the Bandcamp girl from American Pie in that cult too? I don't know. I don't think so. What's that actor? I thought that would have been a way bigger deal because she was a part of that really successful show, How I Met Your Mother. So Bandcamp, American Pie actress. Oh, if you mean one of these girls who was a part of the movie Bandcamp, maybe. I thought you were talking about the redhead. This girl, Allison Hannigan. Nexium, I don't know how to spell it. Cult. I'm not seeing anything. So maybe a different actress, but not Allison Hannigan anyways. Now, well, QC John, I think that's her if you're talking about the main series, but I understand that there might be a different actress who was a part of the specific Bandcamp one. But yeah, anyways, moving on. Josh Shapiro, he's the I'll actually just read it. A man accused of setting fire to the Pennsylvania governor's residence has been arrested. Here's what we know. Pennsylvania authorities have arrested a Harrisburg man, they say, broke into Governor Josh Shapiro's residence early Sunday and started a fire while Shapiro and his family were sleeping. Shapiro, his wife Lori, their 4 children, 2 dogs, and another family member were forced to evacuate the state-owned Harrisburg residence, which was significantly damaged by the fire. No injuries were reported. Cody Bomber, 38, turned himself into police and was being held on charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault, terrorism, and other charges in connection with the fire, which occurred hours after Shapiro and his family hosted a Passover dinner, authorities said. Oh, actually, Bomber was said he was angry with the governor and would have beaten him with a hammer if confronted, according to an affidavit filed by police stated earlier Monday. So, yeah, if you're in politics, especially because of the tenor of politics in our society right now, somebody might break into your house with a hammer and then set your house on fire. So that's just something that can happen. So let's take a look at this. Well,
now you can beat the IRS deadline and file for free. Just upload your docs, answer a few questions, and get your maximum refund. File free now. Roughly 37% of filers qualify. Simple 1040 returns only. Click for eligibility.
Pennsylvania police say a 38-year-old man is in custody in connection with an arson attack at the home of the state's governor. Although firefighters were able to put out the flames, the house was significantly damaged. Governor Josh Shapiro's family was woken up by police and evacuated. The governor says the attack was targeted, but it won't deter him from his work.
This kind of violence is becoming far too common in our society. And I don't give a damn if it's coming from one particular side or the other, directed at one particular party or another, or one particular person or another. It is not okay.
The suspect hasn't been charged yet, but potential charges could include attempted murder, terrorism, aggravated arson, and even more.
All right. So in case you guys didn't know,
the IRS deadline and
arson is bad. Do not do arson. Do not commit arson. And do not try to kill your elected officials, right? So that's my advice. This is probably a similar video that shows the aftermath of the fire attack, but I think we know. This goes into the same pattern of political behavior, like the Nancy Pelosi's husband getting attacked with a hammer, Donald Trump almost getting shot twice. And here's the thing. I think that obviously the political tenor has been raised in our, Luigi Mangione, the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. I think that the political tenor has gotten off the charts to the point that we're going to have schizophrenic violence every now and then. But I do want people to realize, if you commit arson, you should go to jail or prison. If you try to kill someone, you should go to jail or prison. If you succeed in assassinating somebody, you should go to jail or prison. And we should have across the board punishments, right, for anybody who commits these actions. However, I think it needs to be remarked that I don't know what Josh Shapiro is guilty of, that this man felt like he should take part in the attack. It could be the Gazan, his support for Israel and Gaza. But supporting Israel in their war in Gaza, people who are sympathetic to the Palestinian people are going to say that you're taking part in a genocide, right? Then same thing with the United Healthcare CEO. He automated his system in order to deny justified claims, allegedly. And so Luigi Mangione said that, okay, well, you've killed dozens, if not hundreds of people through intentional negligence. Therefore, if you are going to kill a few dozen, few hundred, few thousand people without blinking an eye, and it's going to be legal for you to do so, then I'm going to take your life. That's what Luigi Mangione, at least I believe that's what his justification was. Then same thing with Trump. Trump promised deporting millions of people. He's doing that now. He's deporting that. We still have Kilmar Abrego, who got deported and is not being brought back, despite that being an illegal action. We have Donald Trump and Doge with Elon Musk evaporating our soft power and killing hundreds, if not thousands of people internationally. There are going to be people who want you dead. Just because you cause death through secondary and tertiary consequences doesn't mean that people aren't going to want to kill you. So the rhetoric sucks. The violence sucks. But I think it's just the reality of our fraught political times that people are going to be trying to kill each other when the stakes are this high. Sapien Green says, by the way, did you find out why you got banned midstream? Yeah, I did. So Sapien Green, good to see you as well. It was the Joe Rogan Experience. And we're going to tempt fate again and try to watch the Joe Rogan Experience again today. But there's a auto flag system that they have for the original video where if you watch too much of it, then they flag you for copyright. So if we get taken out, I might just wait a couple of minutes and then I'll start watching the Tim Pool debate. But the truth is that it's fire content. Plenty of other people have done reactions and breakdowns. And so I want to watch some more of it. So, I know it's risky to watch it on the stream when you already have one. But the truth is that it's fair use. If I'm watching them talk for 5 minutes and then I talk for like 5 minutes, breaking it down, that's commentary. That's a fair use of the content. THG says, oh, yes. What's the situation with Moron Putz now? By the way, is this the same dude who lied about being an awesome gamer? Yeah, that's Elon Musk. Moist Critical did a good job talking about it. Lol. Yeah, there's some pretty funny videos of Elon Musk getting bullied when he's playing live and people are talking smack to him in the chat. There's some pretty good memes going around with that. Christian Blair says, which it's strange because Destiny didn't get his stream taken down. Exactly. But that's okay. We'll do it. So this is part of what I was talking about, though, where there's violent rhetoric that is causing schizophrenic assassinations and violent attacks. However, this is part of the violent rhetoric. Russia is allegedly on a ceasefire right now with Ukraine, and yet on Palm Sunday, they murdered like 30 civilians when they bombed a market, like a playground and a surrounding church service. And then not only did they bomb it initially, they waited for first responders to show up in order to start evacuating people, and then they bombed it again. And so you have people, you have the Trump admin suing for peace at any cost. Meanwhile, Ukrainians are getting slaughtered in the worst ways imaginable. And we're just supposed to pretend that this is like part and parcel of regular politics, is kowtowing to dictatorships who are slaughtering civilians, and we're shaking their hands and smiling in photos with them while they're doing it. Sabin Green says, like in everything else, size matters. I agree. Lido Vexer says, you should look into video audio distorting for watching that stuff. I think that's a way to avoid SUTA flagging. Interesting. We'll take a look. Well, let's take a look at this real quick. You could see that he started smiling and then he kind of like went back to a serious face. So he wouldn't be caught smiling on camera. That's the problem with video, though, is you can get him with the smiling stuff. So I get it. He might be conveying more gravitas in the situation, but this is actually the attack that I was talking about. Russian missiles struck the heart of the Ukrainian city of Sumy as people gathered to celebrate Palm Sunday, killing at least 34. We don't have to watch it because we don't need to be gratuitous about it, but you just need to know that, like, well, actually, you know what? Why not? Let's just see if there is anything gratuitous. But these people are running for cover because a missile just struck the downtown area.
Надається допомога пораненим. В цей час знаходилось дуже багато людей на вулиці. Ворог розраховував досягти найбільше нанесення ураження людям по місту Суми.
Yeah, so imagine you're just downtown, you're going to church, it's Palm Sunday, you're chilling with your family, there's supposedly a ceasefire with your enemy, and then a rocket attack just hits downtown and kills 35 people. That's what happened. And we have a admin who's just like, yep, that's what Russians do. It is what it is. It's kind of bananas. Yeah. Yep. Not fun. Now, this is the one that I was talking about with Kilmar Abrego. So Trump set to host Bukele at White House as El Salvador plays key role in administration's immigration agenda. In an era when American alliances have been strained to their breaking point by tariff wars and disputes over military spending, one leader has inserted himself firmly in President Donald Trump's good graces, El Salvador's Nayib Bukele, who will visit the White House on Monday. Bukele's willingness to accept hundreds of migrants who the Trump admin claims are gang members or violent criminals has been critical to the president's ambition of deporting as many as 1 million undocumented people before the first year of his second term. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who announced Sunday that an additional 10 alleged gang members have been sent to El Salvador, wrote online that Trump and Bukele's alliance has become an example for security and prosperity in our hemisphere. Monday's visit will cement Bukele's status as one of the closest foreign partners of the new Trump administration, which has alienated some traditional allies in its early days. One of the region's most popular leaders, Bukele has called himself the world's coolest dictator and the philosopher king as he suspends certain civil liberties to go after his country's gangs. So this is the truth. Bukele won because he said enough with the gang war. There was like El Salvador had one of the highest homicide rates in the Western Hemisphere. And so if anybody had any kind of gang affiliations whatsoever, or if they had any tattoos, they got arrested and they got put into a prison. I'm sure they have other prisons, but the main prison for like the most hardened criminals is called CCOT. And so what the Trump admin did is they negotiated with El Salvador and they said, hey, we have a bunch of MS-13 gang members. If you take them, if we deport them straight to you, will you hold them and we'll pay you millions of dollars? So of course Bukele said, yeah, sure, whatever. That sounds great. And then Trump, because he's a moron and his administration is stupid, they deported half a dozen people who were asylum applicants who had no gang ties, but they were just accused of having gang ties. And now they're stuck in a gulag surrounded by some of that hemisphere's worst criminals and some of that hemisphere's worst guards, most aggressive guards. And so you can see the propaganda videos of CCOT, like this one, where I don't have a problem locking these people up. If you have an MS-13 tattoo, if you have a Tren de Agua tattoo, I have no problems with you being here because you're effectively glamorizing and participating in gang behavior. But I do have issues, obviously, with the innocent people who have been yanked up by this operation. So let's watch this. My dog is scratching my door, so I'll be back in 5 seconds.
Don't wait in line. Beat the deadline with tax experts by your side. Get matched with an expert who can file your taxes as soon as today.
I know you want it.
The IRS deadline is April 15th. Hand off your taxes to an expert today.
You can see the Santa Muerte. This is something that was actually adopted from Mexico's Sinaloa cartel and has been used by gangs across Latin America, including, as the director points out, 18th Street gang.
Inside Secot, El Salvador's notorious terrorism confinement center, tattoos aren't just art. Officials say they're messages, warnings, a visual record of where someone's been and what they've done.
The Saint of Death.
Prison director Bellarmino Garcia says many of these markings are steeped in ritual, loyalty, and violence. But officials insist they don't rely on tattoos alone. Each inmate here, they say, has a file with a criminal history that goes back years.
Activo. He said MS-13 active. And I said, what do you mean by active? He said, still a gang member.
Prison officials selected one inmate for us to speak with, Hector Hernandez. Under close watch by guards, he proudly showed off his tattoos.
Why are you here in this prison? For homicide. Hasta 50 personas. More than 50 people?
Critics question the lack of due process. Officials insist they've done their due diligence, though they acknowledge not all inmates here have been convicted. But El Salvador's Justice and Public Security Ministry insists they can back up each case, in part thanks to this.
They have 1-8, means Barrio 18.
Public Security Minister Gustavo Villatoro shows us his personal gang intelligence book. 20 years in the making, it's now shared with law enforcement around the world, he says.
We are giving support the police in Italy, Spain, in US.
He says their focus is global and includes deportees. If someone in U.S. custody has ties to El Salvador, officials here say they're watching.
Even in the book, you have separate.
While they won't comment on specific cases, Villatoro says they have extensive criminal records on alleged gang members who have yet to be caught.
This information allowed us to catch them when U.S. sent a deportation flight. We check all of them. And if we found someone who we are very sure that he is a member of any gangs in El Salvador, we capture them and put in jail.
You know exactly who's coming in on those deportation flights.
Yes.
So did you specifically want those individuals to come back?
Of course. Of course.
The minister continuously updates his findings and says he shares those records and other gang intel with U.S. law enforcement. The tactics used to track gang symbols here in El Salvador started outside prison walls, where ink can mean art or accusation.
Era como, ¿qué te tapaste? ¿Qué hay ahí? ¿Qué es eso?
What are you covering up? That's what they see when they look at.
Tattoo artist Alejandra Angel says she once worried her ink might draw suspicion, especially after President Nayib Bukele launched a state of emergency in 2022 to dismantle gangs. She says her decision to cover an old design that she no longer liked raised questions, but nothing ever came of it.
Entonces no hay nada malo ahí, no pasa nada.
Camilo Rodriguez, another tattoo artist, says police stopped him twice early on in the crackdown, asking what his tattoos meant.
He said no longer are people fearing police when they have tattoos. He's actually seen more and more professionals, doctors, lawyers come and want to get tattoos done.
Camilo says officers here are now more informed, better trained, more precise. Inside Secot, the country's violent past is etched into skin. Yet for those being sent back across borders, tattoos may not just hint at who they are, they can help decide where they end up.
Yeah, so I saw some chatters going off a little bit in chat. So let me share my perspective. I'm not saying that you need to share it. Sultan Al Fahim says gangbangers and then a cute face. No, this isn't the cute version of it. Jeez. Chase says, yes, we want due process. Yeah, I agree with that. If Biden, John says, if Biden did this, the right would go nuts. I 100% agree. And on top of that, I do find that the hypocritical arguments are not hitting home. A lot of people on the right wing just go, yeah, who cares? You know, they go, when we do it, it's good. That's oftentimes what I get whenever I point out something is, you know, nasty, stupid, against the Constitution, whatever. They just embrace it. They do the Giga Chad meme. Chase says, it kills me when Trump supporters say they don't get due process because they are criminals, but that's exactly what due process is for. Yeah, 100%. It's actually wildly stupid. THG says, don't get me started on how these B words deported an innocent guy who had an autism awareness tattoo. Yeah, that one. And then Kilmar Abrego. I'm actually going to summarize this for you real quick. So thank you to all the people who are here. We're about to break 40. I do appreciate all you guys coming in and hanging out in order to watch the chat. Please remember to like the stream. That way other people know that we're live. They can come hang out as well. And if you have money burning a hole in your pocket, feel free to do a super chat. I, of course, will read all of the super chats throughout the day. Now, Kilmar Abrego, my understanding is he came into the United States in 2011. He was caught in 2019 not panhandling, but actually looking for day labor outside of a Home Depot. He has no criminal record inside the United States, which means that he's been here since 2011. It's been 14 years, and there's been no crime that he has been accused of committing. Because he was wearing a black Chicago Bulls hat, a black Chicago Bulls hat is a touch point for gang affiliation, particularly with MS-13. So the law enforcement officer that took him in used that as a touch point to accuse him of MS-13 affiliation, and then allegedly had another person who corroborated that he was clicked up, but it's a confidential informant, and therefore we don't know why that person was accused of being a gang member. He was brought before an immigration judge, and he was able to articulate to the immigration judge that he had a reasonable fear of being hunted and killed by the 18th Street Gang if he was ever returned to El Salvador. Well, what happened was the Trump admin yanked him up, despite the fact that he had a no deportation to El Salvador order. They yanked him up and they deported him to Secot. So he is currently in prison with a bunch of MS-13 gang members and with a bunch of 18th Street gang members, all of whom are people that might want to kill him. Whereas he doesn't have a criminal record. I think he's from Venezuela. He doesn't have a criminal record in Venezuela. He doesn't have a no, he's from El Salvador. He doesn't have a criminal record in El Salvador. He doesn't have a criminal record in the United States. He doesn't have any tattoos that show that he's a member of MS-13, and he hasn't committed a crime in the United States in the past 14 years. And so they effectively took an innocent man and they put him in prison with all of the people that would want to kill him. So, and then now they're refusing to bring him back, right? Was the reason for his reasonable fear ever stated? According to my memory, which is faulty, but I'm happy to be corrected at any point, his family ran a business that was in Venezuela, but also ran a business that was in the United States as well. And he said that their family's business had been threatened for extortion by the 18th Street Gang, and they had refused to cooperate. And as a result of that lack of cooperation, the 18th Street Gang had threatened him and his family's lives. So, yeah, Sam Monroe says being put away for life is horrible. In horrible circumstances for having a tattoo is inhuman. What's wrong with putting criminals that have been proven to be such in normal prisons? So Sam Monroe, I'm going to disagree with you, but you know I do identify as kind of like a rhino, never Trump Republican. So it's okay if you're more liberal or progressive than me. Obviously, a tattoo should not be enough. However, with MS-13 and with the 18th Street Gang, they do use gang tattoos as a affiliation and ranking system, and these gangs are so pernicious and violent that I, of course, want the due process standards that are inside the United States where a tattoo isn't enough to put you in prison or jail. But I understand that El Salvador has detained and arrested these people and then used their own internal tattoo system in order to identify the crimes that these people are alleged to have committed and then use that as grounds for holding them. But El Salvador's homicide rate has dropped by like 95% in the past decade as a result of this authoritarian action. And so the people of El Salvador, relatively speaking, are actually very much in favor. El Salvador homicide rate by year. Let's take a look. 2014. Yeah, 103 per 100,000 is worse than Iraq during the peak of the civil war in Iraq. I want you to put that into context. So the peak was 103. We are at 5, by the way. The United States is considered a violent, developed country, and we are at 5 per 100,000 is our homicide rate. Most European countries are at 2. So El Salvador, through this draconian and authoritarian measure, they went from 103 to 2. So they've effectively, through an authoritarian means, I'm not going to deny it, they dropped their homicide rate by like 98, 99%. And let's go ahead and take Iraq homicide rate by year 2000s. To present, 1990 to 2025, Iraq homicide rate. So in 2009, which was the peak of the global war on terror, was at 15. Through ISIS, it was at 10. And then now, 30 years. I'm trying to look at what else. I want to see. I want to see through the 20s. But you have to understand that Iraq was in a civil war in which hundreds of thousands of people were butchered, and they had a 75% less homicide rate compared to El Salvador. Like, do you understand how crazy that is? That is crazy pants. So, number of documented civilian deaths. I'm assuming this is like per 100,000. Oh, no. These are in the tens of thousands. Never mind. I'm looking for the homicide rate. The point is that even in 2009, it was around like 15, which was considered crazy pants, right? Whereas El Salvador was chilling at 100. That's bananas. So yeah, if I had El Salvador's problem, I might be willing to be as authoritarian as El Salvador was. That's all I'm saying. THG says, if you don't mind me asking, are there grounds to brand America as a nocracy, or if you mean autocracy, if not an autocracy, if they are a result when democracy merits halfway in autocracy, especially under oligarchies? Yeah, so what I would say, THG, is we're not there yet because Congress has the ability to step up and they need to, and I'm sure the Democrats are poisoning themselves for it. Right now, Donald Trump is trying to make it an autocracy. However, it's not there yet because our Congress members, they can still impeach him, they can still depose him, they can still charge him with crimes. And I think that the Democrats are gearing up in order to substantively mute Trump's power in the midterms. So I know that the next 2 years are going to suck. I'm not saying that they won't, but the courts and the Congress need to check him before I'll be willing to say that we're just an autocracy. HJK says, why are we locking up a person who hasn't done any harm? Because the Trump administration is filled with incompetent monsters. Sam Monroe says, I respect your disagreement and I'm center left, but Swedish, and we have a completely different perspective on punishment here, which I agree with, perhaps because of our culture. Well, thank you, Sam. I do appreciate you being a little bit more understanding of my perspective, even if my perspective is harsh. I do appreciate it. HJK says, you don't think an authoritarian might have massaged the data to justify their brutal policies? Yeah, 100%. I'm sure it's possible. Sapien Green says, extreme circumstances require extreme measures. What matters is how it ends when the extreme situation is over. Agreed, Sapien. So now that El Salvador has control on their homicide rate, they need to figure out how to liberalize their economy and society so they don't live in a police state dystopian nightmare. Agreed. Doom Spiral says, I don't know if Democrats taking congressional seats in the midterm changes how Trump does anything since it's all executive order. I disagree, only because he will be more liable to be impeached and actually have that impeachment process go through. And so as a result, his sensitivity to being removed from office increases. Now, no offense to any Democrats in chat, but I don't trust Democrats to have the stones to actually go after Trump in a substantive way. However, that doesn't mean that they don't have the power to. So if somebody was asking me if we live in a autocracy right now, like a dictatorship, we don't live in a dictatorship yet. Okay. Not yet. And I don't think we will. I think there's enough of us, hopefully, there's enough normal, sane people who actually like the republic that we won't fall into an autocracy. Now, this one I'm not going to watch, but Bernie Sanders makes a surprise appearance at Coachella. All I wanted to bring up in reference to this one is Bernie Sanders and AOC seem more comfortable hanging out with Hassan Piker. Truth be told, I am not a fan of Hassan Piker. I'm actually a pretty harsh critic of his. However, there are progressives who are still playing to the younger base. And I do think that the shift in alternative media is going to be a part of this shift where you're going to see increasingly mainstream politicians participate in the alternative media space. As an example, Joe Rogan having Donald Trump on, and then the Harris campaign trying to get her on 60 days before the election. I think that's going to be more normal in the next 5 to 10 years. Contra FDN says, yeah, but liberalizing will give opportunity for gangs to get their vengeance. I mean, Contra FDN, I agree. But you have to understand that we have a quote from Benjamin Franklin, and it's like those who would give away essential liberty for the veneer of security will receive and deserve neither, right? So actually, let's take a look at the quote. Ben Franklin, liberty and safety quote. And I think this, it doesn't have to be 100% correct, but I still think that it's accurate. Those that give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Right? So the point is that we have to define what is essential liberty. I don't think that getting tattoos of the people that you've murdered is an essential liberty. But to purchase little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety. This isn't like a hard axiom. I wouldn't live my life by this specific statement. However, I think that what we should derive from the statement is that we need to identify what is essential liberty for a human life. And then we also need to be wary of those who use threats to safety as excuses to tamp down on our liberty. So it's kind of more of, in my opinion, it's more of a warning than it is like a maxim, in my opinion. Thought that was Jefferson. Oh, nice. Yeah, I think it's Franklin, to be honest. Then THG says, have you ever heard of anocracies at a certain point in your life? They are essentially a recent yet very unstable threat. Is that like where authoritarian governments use anarchy as a way to rule? I heard of that. Or semi-democracy is a form of government that is loosely defined as part democracy and part dictatorship, or as a regime that mixes democratic with autocratic features. I mean, yeah, that's we're definitely flirting with that right now. I'll tell you that. That's we're flirting with it. Then I just wanted to share this real quick. Moving to the next news story. This isn't like a huge deal, but my brother, believe it or not, actually works with Blue Origin on the rockets. And this is a very phallic rocket that has this crew compartment up here and then the rocket system. And it's basically for space tourism. And they launched Gail, Oprah's friend Gail, and Katy Perry into space temporarily. They looked around and then they came back down and nobody died. So good job to my brother. And good job to the Blue Origin team on not killing a bunch of celebrities. Let's take a look at it real quick before we get into the Joe Rogan thing that might get us taken down. Oh, well, I guess it's not working. That's totally fine. But good job. Good job to Blue Origin not accidentally killing Katy Perry. John says, I hate that Bernie is doing that with Hassan, but I'm glad he's being active. I respect that a lot. Agreed. I have a very strong distaste to the point of like screaming profanity of Hassan Piker. However, I am happy that some politicians are taking alternative media seriously because I do think that's the future of politics. THG says, do you ever imagine how introducing independent elections could be a good idea, even though they may be expensive? I think that if I was talking about simple reforms, I think the main thing that I like is with political donations and lobbying, I think that I still want to increase congressional salaries and then have them put all their assets into a blind trust. And then I think I want a lifetime ban from lobbying. So what I would say is to split the difference, there are think tanks where wildly experienced people go and they talk about ideas and policy and technology and all that kind of stuff. If you were a previous congressman, I think that being a part of a think tank would be fine. But I think that being a part of a lobbying group where you're effectively using all of your previous connections that you had while you're in Congress in order to push for certain organizations, I don't know if I like that. I feel like it's a nepotistic old boys club. Now, maybe that's part of democracy. I'm going to have to think about it a little bit, but I know 100% I want Congress members to put all their assets into a blind trust and stop trading individual stocks. I know I want that 100%. Chase says Katy Perry rambled like a lunatic after they landed. Well, no offense to Katy Perry, but I haven't really credited her with a lot of brains, to be honest. Lido Vexer says, much cooler than Bezos launching himself into space. I mean, if he didn't come back. Lol. Sorry, just joking. Chase says, I was surprised with how well Gail handled it, though. Oh, yeah. I don't know anything about Gail except for that she's Oprah's friend. But if you're Oprah's friend, she's one of the most famous people on the planet, and she's constantly accused of running pedophile rings and satanic cabals. So I think you probably have to be a tough cookie to be Oprah's friend. Raymond Smith says 17th Amendment needs to be used on representatives at the state level. Let's take a look at the 17th Amendment so we can all learn something today. 17th Amendment to the United States. 17th Amendment states, oh God, it's a long one. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislatures. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of elections to fill such vacancies, provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive, therefore, to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election that the legislature may direct. What part of that do you want to be fulfilled? Because that feels like a procedural issue in reference to representatives. So I'm not quite sure what problem that resolves. Sultan Al Fahim laughs and cries. True. Chase says, yeah, it's just because Gail was openly afraid of flying and they said she was only doing it to get over the fear. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty ballsy. I wouldn't that's like being afraid of heights. And then in order to get over your fear of jumping off of a 5-foot embankment, you go skydiving. That's kind of crazy. Yeah, that's crazy pants. All right, so we're gonna risk it for the biscuit, okay? So we might get taken down. Sorry, I need my shoulder stabber. It's called a Theracane. It's a S-shaped cane with nubs on it, and if your shoulder hurts, you can stab yourself in the back on your knots with the Theracane. It's very nice. It's a very nice tool. Now, what we're going to do, there is a company that Joe Rogan has hired that is taking down people reacting to the full Joe Rogan Experience video. However, this is fire and relevant content, and I want to watch it and pause it and break it down. And also, there are a dozen channels who have already done so, and I feel like I was auto-flagged and taken down incorrectly. Okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to watch it and I'm going to pray that we don't get taken down. If we do get taken down, I'm going to stop the segment. I'm going to wait 5 minutes for chat to come back and for us to be able to see each other again. And then we'll move on to the Tim Pool debate. But we're going to try. Okay. We're going to give it a shot. All right. Yeah. How about that? And then let's find this, and then I'll do an intro. Oh, before we do that, though, I'm going to pull up Daryl Cooper's tweets. Daryl Cooper. Sorry, I'm looking for it. All right, hold on. We're just going to watch this real quick. So, me to Trump economics team, and it's a Shane Gillis. He's flying on an airplane, and his plane is experiencing turbulence. It's going to have profanity. It's going to have profanity. So if you're not into profanity, you might want to mute it while this video is being played, okay? So just imagine that this is an American citizen, and he's flying to meet Trump's economic team in D.C. You have been warned, there will be profanity.
Yeah, you guys fucking suck at your job. I'm gonna come down there and beat the fuck out of you, you fucking stupid bitch. All right, I'll be down in 10 minutes. Get ready. You better start stretching. I'm gonna fucking wear you out, dumbass. 10 minutes. Parking lot, pussy. Yeah, you got...
So, yeah, just imagine that. And then let me see if I can find... Oh, here's Daryl Cooper. So part of the argument is that Martyr Made is Daryl Cooper. And so this was like a conspiracy theorist who was invited onto the Joe Rogan podcast. And Joe Rogan and Dave Smith both defended him, saying that he wasn't like a Holocaust denier. And people who have found all the crazy stuff that he said. So this is a picture of the Nazis conquering Germany. And here's a picture of that drag queen Last Supper thing done at the Olympics. And the tweet is, this may be putting it too crudely for some, but the picture on the left was infinitely preferable in virtually every way than the one on the right. So he's literally, you know, he could say that he's being hyperbolic or making a joke, but he's saying that I don't like drag queens replicating a Christian piece of art for the Olympics. I think that's cringe. But I also don't think that anybody dies as a result of drag queens mimicking a religious holiday for the Olympics, right? Nobody died as a result of that. Whereas Nazi Germany invading France, obviously they killed people during the invasion. Obviously they killed people afterwards. And then obviously they hunted down like gypsies and Jews and other minorities and slaughtered them for immutable characteristics. So this statement is crazy pants. Then Daryl Cooper also said democracy is a disease, tyranny is the cure. So he's literally simping for Donald Trump and or previous people like Hitler and Stalin being the cures to democracy. Then this is Elon Musk cheering on community notes, commenting on something that Daryl Cooper stated. Daryl Cooper says, Hitler tried again going on the radio to broadcast a call for peace directly to the British people. He would give back the parts of Poland that were not majority German and would work with the other powers to reach an acceptable solution to the Jewish problem. He was ignored. Then here's the community note. The Jewish problem is a euphemism for the racist genocidal Nazi theory that Jews are a corrupt and inferior race that is to blame on all of Germany and humanity's problems. Their solution to this problem was first ethnic cleansing and then the genocide of all Jews. So, yeah, again, simping and sweeping for Hitler. Time for a Churchill thread. Let's do this. Why I think Churchill was the chief villain or was a chief villain of World War II. I know this sounds like hyperbole. Churchill didn't order the most deaths, oversee the most atrocities, or commit the worst crimes, but most of those crimes could not have been committed if the war had not happened, and Churchill was the leader and intent on making the war happen. And so so he's done everything that Douglas Murray accused him of. He did, right? So that's where if you see Dave Smith and Joe Rogan sweeping for Daryl Cooper, I'm sure it's out of a position of ignorance. However, they are sweeping for a guy who sucks and is absolutely a Nazi apologist. Ryan Keyworth says, have you ever read any of David Irving's books, specifically Hitler's War, and what did you think of it? I have not read it. Yes, it's a great book. So he's saying that he loves historical revisionism. which is fine. Like, I don't care if you're like a Nazi Holocaust denier or a historical revisionist, but I'm going to call you a piece of shit, right? I'm going to call you a piece of shit, and I'm going to think that anybody who platforms you should challenge you on your shitty ideology. This is Daryl Cooper says, Guten Morgen, fellas. And he has a 777 German symbol cup. No, I'm an outlaw, openly Nazi, and an anthropomorphic cat. I'm unemployable. And so apparently this is merchandise for a Nazi on Twitter, like an unapologetic National Socialist. I unironically wear leather pants and formally observe Hitler's birthday. I don't care if you want to believe Kamala Harris is going to outperform FDR and sweep the Electoral College because Soros's progeny told you so. I'm just trying to help disabled people like you better themselves. I'll cease commentary on the Zog show. Yeah, so it's another piece of garbage. He's tagging an unapologetic Nazi while showing off that unapologetic Nazi's merchandise. So like at what point do we just pretend that, like, at what point do we just say that this isn't a joke anymore? Right? At what point do we just say it's not a joke? Okay. So I have a friend who's crazy and he's racist and I love him. And he has horrible things to say about Jews and blacks and all that kind of stuff. He has horrible things to say. But at the end of the day, I know that if there was a black gentleman or a Jewish gentleman on the side of the road whose car was broken down, he would stop and he would help them because he's a fundamentally good human being. And as racist and crappy as he is, he's actually just a good person. And so he would never participate in like an ethnocide or a genocide, right? Whereas with these people, not only are they quote unquote making jokes, they are following through and then just saying that they're Nazis. How do I truly know that? Because I've seen him do it before. He talked, my friend, I'm actually combining two people in my mind because I have a racist family member and then I have a racist friend. But both of them, this is true. They talk a big game about how much they sapient cream cheese. But they talk a big game about hating people and being misanthropic and hating, Jewish people because they, subvert society and hating black people because they're degenerates. But then whenever they're out in public and they're actually interacting with people, they're actually just like, I don't know, nice. They're polite, they're tactful, they're kind, So, whether or not they would get swept, you're kind of right to point this out. Whether or not they would get swept away by an active fascist genocidal movement, maybe they would. Maybe I'm coping. However, I've seen them interact with black people and Jews, and they didn't like freak out and be just like crazy racist for no reason to people over immutable characteristics. So I think it's just like cognitive dissonance on their end, where the morality that they were raised with to treat people well, regardless of their origin, is conflicting with their bigotry. So that's the best I can give you right now. Sorry, let me check and see if somebody important is calling me. Probably not, and then we'll start the segment. Nope, potential spam. All right. So what's going to happen? I'm going to thank you guys. There's 40 people cross-platform hanging out with us today. Please remember to like the stream. It does let other people know that we're here. Also, if you have a super chat burning a hole in your pocket, please feel free to donate to the show. It's never required, but it is appreciated. Likes are great. Chatting is great. Commenting on the video once it's up is great. Super chats are appreciated, but never required. And besides that, I parasocially love you for being here. Without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to continue to watch. We are going to enjoy Douglas Murray's commentary as he fights Dave Smith and Joe Rogan. It was kind of a passionate debate between these figures that was very big last week, but we didn't get through all of it because we got taken down for a copyright notice. If the copyright notice happens again, I'm going to wait 5 minutes and then I'm going to do more content. We are going to be live until 3 p.m. So hang out with us. I'll still have other content to review if this gets taken down. Don't worry about it. But let's do an intro and get into it. So, Hi, guys. My name's Connor. Welcome to Counterpoints. I am very happy to be here with you fine, beautiful people again. We're going to be watching Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray on the Joe Rogan podcast. This was a hot debate last week. We did get copyright taken down last time we were watching it, which stinks. We're going to try to make it through this time. If we do get taken down again, no problems. We will copyright challenge it in the back end, and we'll just move on to some other content. However, Douglas Murray's passionate argument that Dave Smith and Joe Rogan have platformed Daryl Cooper and Ian Carroll, who are both people who forward historic revisionism and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, is just substantiated. The way that we substantiated it before we watched the segment is we just went through Daryl Cooper's tweet history, in which he accused Churchill of being one of the chief villains of World War II, in which he promoted merchandise related to another Nazi creator, in which he talked about how he effectively viewed like actions by the Allies to be as nefarious as the Axis. I don't think I showed that specifically in this most recent video, but I have seen other evidence to that effect. And so as a result, what Douglas Murray is accusing Dave Smith and Joe Rogan of being is effectively useful idiots for distant right-wing authoritarian psychos, and then them not knowing enough in order to push back against the baloney of those bad faith communicators. And so without further ado, we did watch, 20 minutes already so far. We're going to continue on with the segment now. So let's take a look at what else they got.
And I agree with you about the breakdown of trust. Absolutely. We have lived through an era.
Oops. That's way too fast. Let me go down to 1x speed.
Where in real time, we saw something called a conspiracy, the lab leak, which turns out to be true, as you and others said it might be from the beginning.
I find that to be very racist.
And against Joe?
How dare you
against
both of you?
It
Both
used
of you.
to be racist when we were saying that it was likely that the COVID variant had come out from the place making COVID variants.
Especially since it's made the exact
just seemed like it. Seemed like it was possible to us.
By the way,
ask yourself this: who has access to your medical history? In theory, it's just you and your doctor, but in reality, hundreds of shady companies called data brokers are keeping tabs.
Do you help those minds?
I don't care about the commercial. And again, if we get taken out, please let me know. But conspiracy theorists can be good socially in order to challenge power. However, that isn't good enough, right?
That have been blow themselves out some more by doing a whole load of other conspiracy stuff. Do you decide to go, hey, what else have we been lied to? Maybe Churchill wasn't a great guy. Maybe Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. Maybe the Holocaust, etc.
Nobody is saying that. No one is saying maybe Hitler wasn't such a bad guy.
You are saying that.
No
if
one's
you're saying that in the 1930s, Hitler kept the anti-Semitism down.
No. That's not what he's saying. What he was saying is that he didn't do it as publicly. He was doing it in meetings because the support for that kind of thinking wasn't as ubiquitous as it was.
Joe, I've seen this before. I know exactly what these guys are drinking. They're drinking a couple of very, very discredited historians like David Irving, and they are just regurgitating it. And it was always been the same thing. It is always an attempt to minimize Hitler's anti-Semitism actions. Eventually down the road, you get to minimizing his actual involvement in the Holocaust. And then you can go
but
on to the next stage.
You can't say that about Daryl.
Okay, I think what you're
Exactly
guilty of here is kind of similar to, I think, something that the woke left has done, which is this concept creep, where you're talking about some people online who are doing this thing, and then you're lumping in other people with them. Listen, I'll just say this right now. Daryl Cooper is currently, I believe, almost finished, or he's working on a big World War II series. And when this comes out,
what's it going to be on?
we can see
podcast.
Yeah, he does long form podcasts. When this comes out, I am quite confident to say beforehand that if you're going into it expecting him to be downplaying the atrocities of the Nazis or downplaying the evil things that Adolf Hitler did, you're going to be disappointed.
My point is, why are we even talking about this guy?
Because you brought him up.
Yes, because he comes on podcasts like this. My point is, this is not a serious historian. He's not a historian.
He never claims to be. He's been doing these long form podcasts on these subjects for over a decade. And if you go back to 2015.
So let's break that down a little bit. So what Douglas Murray is saying is that there's an appeal to conspiracy. We talked about appeal to anomaly. That's the better way to phrase it. So previously we watched a ContraPoints video, and in the ContraPoints video, she talked about the way that conspiracists operate. And the way that they operate, especially there's people who are earnest and there's people who are not earnest. There are people who are nefarious. And so the people who are earnest, what they do is the people who are nefarious is they appeal to anomaly. So they'll say, isn't it weird that, isn't it weird that, isn't it weird that? But then once they have the audience primed in order to believe that the official narrative around a historical event is filled with holes, then they present an alternative explanation. But the alternative explanation oftentimes doesn't have evidence to substantiate that. So what Douglas Murray has said so far, at least in what we've watched, and I'm going to be pausing pretty frequently to try to avoid the copyright hit, but what's going on is Douglas Murray is saying that Daryl Cooper appeals to anomaly, tries to revise the past, and that he tries to minimize using David Irving, which is actually somebody that we saw in the tweets beforehand. They try to use discredited historians in order to substantiate the fact that Hitler is just one of many bad actors in World War II instead of the principal bad actor. And therefore, by bringing up all the atrocities and the bad actions of Stalin and of Churchill, they can end up minimizing like German culpability for World War II and also the industrialization of slaughter that Germany participated in World War II. And so he's accusing them, Joe Rogan and Dave Smith, of effectively being useful idiots for this kind of like historical revisionism. What Joe Rogan says is that on my podcast, Daryl Cooper didn't do that. And then also Dave Smith says that he's currently working on a long form World War II podcast, and I'm quite confident that he won't be downplaying the Holocaust. Now, here's my problem with that, is that Jordan Peterson has this concept that I actually agree with a lot, which is the belief that no one is the perfect avatar of any individual ideology. And so you are not going to get somebody who is going to be the perfect Nazi or the perfect communist or the perfect liberal or the perfect this or perfect that. Instead, human beings are fractals of their respective ideologies. And so you don't need like kind of what Dave Smith is doing and what I think Joe Rogan is doing, intentionally or not, is that they're denying that Daryl Cooper is the perfect archetype of the Nazi with a perfect Nazi ideology. But Douglas Murray is saying that's not necessary. He doesn't need to be the perfect like philosophical National Socialist. He can still be somebody who makes it easier for National Socialists to do apologia, and he would have a problem with it, which I think is fine. I think that's a perfectly fine thing to say. Razzle Smasher says, Connor, good to see you again, Razzle. Connor, you should try playing at 1.25 speed. That may help the copyright strike. I agree, but I also just want to, I don't know, consume the content, and hopefully it's not a pain in the butt. I agree with you, but we'll see. THG says, while I like these people, they are not wrong on the COVID-19 Wuhan lab leak. Conspiracy nuts I have a problem with, like Alex Jones and others. Yeah, so conspiracy theorists can be correct about a few things, and they can also be correct that some official narratives are either lied about or hyperbolized in order for the government to do bad things. That's not the problem. The problem isn't a skepticism about power. You should have skepticism about power. The problem is, what other power structures are you playing to? And I think what Douglas Murray is going to be arguing is that effectively Dave Smith does nose on, nose off with whether or not he's a comedian or a serious political commentator. And then Daryl Cooper does nose on, nose off with whether or not he's a layman who simply enjoys history, or if he's actually like a National Socialist historical revisionist, right? And he'll play cute, right? BizD says, yes, but Murray doesn't substantiate it on the podcast. I agree. If you wanted a stronger criticism of these characters, then I think Douglas Murray next time should bring receipts, because he could have caught Joe Rogan and Dave Smith very flat-footed if they were like, no, Daryl Cooper doesn't say that. And he's like, okay, well, here's Daryl Cooper's previous statements. Here's what he has said. How do you characterize those statements? I think that would have been a pretty heavy dunk if he had come with that information. Boom. Jonah Boy says, what's up, guys? Well, what's up, man? Good to see you. Lido Vexer says, I can be mad at Joe for not having an actual expert on these subjects with any regularity while constantly bringing on and propagating overconfident conspiracy theorists and fake historians. Sure. Sure. I think these are reasonable criticisms. Reasonable criticisms. Salmon, I don't want to go for censorship, though. He should still be allowed to bring kooks onto his program, but he should also bring on people who will debunk the kooks, right? I think that would be more powerful. Sam Monroe says, I hate when Smith always goes to the argument, so he's not allowed to talk about it. It's such a virtue signaling baloney straw man. Agreed, Sam Monroe. I think Daryl Cooper can talk about it. I think just other people of good faith and good experience should call him out when he's either lying or hyperbolizing or lying through omission. Contra FDN says unsubstantiated conspiracies are unsubstantiated conspiracy theories are entertaining. I was having fun watching the Nazis Antarctica conspiracy a few weeks ago. Yeah. So if conspiracy theories are nothing more than like a cute, fun idea to play, like, wouldn't it be fun if? That's something that Contra Points brought up. Nobody would have a problem with conspiracy theories. What people have problems with is people poking holes in the quote unquote official narrative, but then preventing or providing alternative narratives that are nefarious. That's the main problem. But let's continue.
And listen to Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. It's an incredible piece. And it's
Excellent.
How many hours long?
30 something.
And it literally starts from the persecution of the Jews, where they're being driven out of Europe. It's like this horrific account of what happens to these people. It's what he's trying to do is paint a picture of how the world goes mad and how the world goes sideways. And he's doing it from the perspective initially of these Jewish people that are living in Europe, that all of a sudden their neighbors are turning on them and they're being attacked. Like it's incredibly charitable. But what he's trying to do is show what happens to human beings when they're confronted with unbelievable atrocities and how things go so incredibly sideways.
Lots of people have written and spoken about that.
So why is he not allowed to? I don't understand.
Allowed to. So
Okay.
he is allowed to. I'm saying that there's a weird way in which figures like him, whose ideas are not being countered when they are raised, are given platform after platform to spread their views. They are welcome to those platforms. I'm not saying they shouldn't be platformed. I'm saying these are very, very fringe figures who are pushing ideas that are either debunked now, have been debunked before, or they will not stand up against somebody who disagrees with them.
Oh, okay. I would just say maybe this is the disconnect here. When you say there's like not pushback, Daryl's one line on Tucker Carlson, this one line where he himself said he was being hyperbolic and kind of says this to prod at his buddy, got more pushback than any one line I've ever heard on a podcast. There were numerous articles written by historians, numerous shows that covered it. People went through, there were Twitter threads about it. So I don't exactly get your point. Like, there was lots of pushback. If you're saying he should go and debate somebody who's giving him pushback on that, okay, maybe. I also think it's reasonable for him to say, I don't really do debates.
Yeah, I think it's weird to mainstream very fringe views constantly and not give another side. I think that's weird.
Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a contradiction here. You're saying now that these are fringe views, but then you're also saying that these are enormously powerful
No.
views.
There's no contradiction. Let me clear it up if you think there is. I think there are very fringe views that have become mainstreamed on the right.
But then aren't they not fringe by definition?
Sure, you can play an epistemological game.
I'm just saying let's be
But you
accurate.
do understand the concept, don't you?
That fringe ideas become mainstreamed?
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
Sure.
So that's it.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure. So
Yo, so hold on. Actually, I really like that because Douglas is like, are you screwing with me? Like, are you messing with me? Yeah, Hill Williams says, lol, Dave Smith going full debate pervert. No, I love that. So just to clarify this, because I do have to pause it intermittently, so hopefully we don't have any copyright issues. But Dave Smith accuses Douglas Murray of concept creep, where just even having conversations about fringe ideas is enough for Douglas Murray to like call people out. And Joe Rogan, I think this was a piece by Daryl Cooper, but if it was by a different author, I apologize for mixing them up. I think he said Fear and Loathing in Israel, which is funny because I remember Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is the drug gonzo journalism. I forget is it Hunter Thompson, something like that? It's effectively a piece about doing a bunch of drugs and going to Las Vegas and, traveling and partying and almost getting killed and all that kind of stuff. So I was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas was a hilarious movie. and apparently a pretty good, journalistic piece. Fear and Loathing in Israel apparently is something either by Daryl Cooper or somebody adjacent to Daryl Cooper, which was about how atrocities and murder happens, right? And so that's interesting. And of course, there can be fringe people who present interesting ideas from interesting perspectives. That's totally fine. But Daryl Cooper's one line on Tucker Carlson was pushed back on. This is okay for Dave Smith to point out, and I think it's a coherent point for his side, which is Tucker Carlson does get a lot of pushback. Candace Owens does get a lot of pushback. A lot of these distant right-wing figures have incredible amounts of criticism thrown their way, including me, by the way. I criticize Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and Andrew Tate on this very show very recently. So they do get tons of criticism. But what Douglas Murray's problem is that the fringe ideas are being mainstreamed on the right. And so Tucker Carlson is a version of that. He has mainstreamed very insane things. He mainstreamed the Dominion voting lawsuit despite knowing that it was a lie. He has normalized the narrative that Putin is just somebody who's advocating in his own geopolitical interest, and him invading Ukraine is nothing but him protecting his own ethnicity. He's traveled to Russia in order to do propaganda puff pieces for Russia, saying that, they still got food in their grocery stores and everything is still cheap, so everything's fine. All of your narratives about Russia being economically and socially and politically isolated is BS because there's cheap grocery items. That was literally a segment from Tucker Carlson. Same thing with Lauren Chen. You have Lauren Chen and Tim Pool, who were recruited into a Russian psychological operation in order to promote isolationism within American politics, in order to try to get the United States to cut off its relationship with Ukraine. And guess what? Their perspective won. They won the White House. Trump is in the White House, and he agrees with their allegedly fringe ideas, right? And so Douglas Murray's point is that the right wing is mainstreaming fringe ideas that have been debunked consistently, and Dave Smith and Joe Rogan are part of the problem. So I think that you can acknowledge the strength of Dave Smith's point that these people are getting pushed back on, while also acknowledging Douglas Murray's problem that there are effectively really strong, distant right-wing propagandists who are being mainstreamed. And Dave Smith, somebody called him a debate pervert in chat. Yeah, he's being a debate pervert. He's using he's using rhetoric to try to poke at a hypocrisy that doesn't exist. Biz D calls it out exactly. Murray deflated the debate slurrery real quick. Yeah, apparently. Razzle Smasher confirms that it's Hunter S. Thompson. Exactly. That's who we're talking about with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Raymond Smith says, so I'm lost. What are they talking about? So just in case you're just joining the chat, or if you're popping into the VOD randomly, my name's Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints and Counterpoints 40K. We're watching the Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray debate that happened on the Joe Rogan podcast. And what they're talking about is Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. No. Dave Smith and Joe Rogan both talked to a Nazi historical revisionist named Daryl Cooper. And if you don't believe that he's a Nazi historical revisionist, you can go check out some archives on Twitter of his previous posts where he effectively admits as much. And so Douglas Murray said, I don't have a problem with you talking to these guys. I have a problem with you talking to these guys consistently without having the knowledge yourself in order to debunk them in real time. And then also not talking to experts who may be able to debunk these popular narratives, because these narratives are largely fringe and discredited. And so Dave Smith is saying well, I thought we lived in a free country. Can I talk to whoever I want to talk to? And Douglas Murray is saying, yeah, talk to who you want to talk to. But if it's a bad idea, you should call it out. Easy peasy. So Dennis Montas says, I've seen this. I admire Douglas Murray for his ethical coherence, which is precisely what is lacking in way too many people. Agreed. Chase says, Tucker mainstreamed the idea that America doesn't have bread like Russia. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Sultan Al-Fahim says, Tucker knows how to talk and is likable, and Kamala didn't sound like a human. Well, I agree with you there that Kamala has a authenticity issue where oftentimes very talented propagandists do not have an authenticity issue. They seem like charismatic and fun people to have a beer with. I would have a beer with Tucker Carlson. I would just be arguing with him the entire time. Big in Gaming says, Cooper saying that the killing on the Eastern Front was mostly due to killing humane reasons because people were starving, more historical revisionism protecting Hitler. Exactly. So Big in Gaming brings this up, and this is the perfect example. So Big in Gaming brings up the fact that Daryl Cooper has allegedly said that the millions of people who were killed on the Eastern Front were killed because the Germans felt bad because they were starving, and so they were effectively doing euthanasia on Russian citizens, right? That is historical revisionism. The Germans went to war. They wanted Lebensraum. Their mass slaughters of civilians are well documented. Saying that some German general somewhere said, hey, technically we're doing the civilians a favor because we're putting them down instead of letting them starve to death is not, that's historical revisionism. That's them trying to minimize the atrocities of Nazi Germany, right? Raymond Smith says, thanks, bro. I got it. Good. Awesome. Well, QC John says, I don't laugh at conspiracy theories anymore. I went 42 years of my life laughing at goofs before I found out the government does salt and pepper clouds to make rain and direct energy guns are real. True. Right. So well, QC John brings up an interesting point. I promise I'll try to get back to the content momentarily. But just because a conspiracy theorist brings up a thing doesn't mean that there isn't an element of truth to that thing. I agree with that. However, we also needed to debunk all the stupid stuff too, right? Pico says, interesting stream. Thank you. Well, be sure to like the stream. That way other people know that we're live. And if you have money burning a hole in your pocket, then go ahead and send us a super chat. It would be appreciated, but never required. Jonah Boy says, yeah, Tucker comes off like a smarmy rat to me. Even if I didn't know who he was, I'd still want to. All right. Well, he can be smarmy sometimes. I'll agree with that part of the comment. All right, continuing.
You're saying that what Joe shouldn't have Daryl Cooper on?
I'm saying that
he should debate.
That there will have that if you mainstream very, very fringe views, which are easily able to be debunked, if you mainstream them, at some point that view that was so fringe will be what eager, very disconnected, unhappy people are going to start playing with too. And if these people are such experts in how you see a society go weird, they can look at what is happening to a portion of the right everywhere on this stuff. There is a portion of the right across the West that is playing this very dark game, and they're doing it deliberately, and you can't not be aware of that.
I agree with that. I don't think Daryl Cooper is doing that, but I do agree with your character.
He's just wrong.
I think it's a pretty important distinction there.
You're just
See, what's funny, because literally he's saying, like, I don't think Daryl Cooper's doing that, but that's because Dave Smith is a useful idiot. So we just went through the Twitter. It's very obvious that he is doing that. That's precisely what he's doing. That's the game that he's playing. Douglas Murray says that you're being played by nefarious figures, and he's just right. I'm just writing that down because I think that's the crux of Douglas's argument is like, yeah, talk to him all you want, but you're being played. And Joe Rogan and Dave Smith are like, no, we're not. And it's like, yeah, you are. We literally just read the tweets and you are being played. Jon Stewart needs to talk to Tucker again. Absolutely. Although I think Jon Stewart's lost it a little bit, but you know, he still has his good moments.
Making this one statement and then this where he's trying to joke around with his buddy, this Churchill statement. And this is the basis
he and these other guys are all doing the anti-Churchill stuff now.
But he's not doing an anti-Churchill stuff.
He and the other people in the orbit.
Churchill was the author of this whole Operation Unthinkable, right? Where they wanted to use the Nazis to invade Russia. Wasn't that Churchill? Is that not true?
We're going to have to get into the weeds on Churchill. There is always going to be a corner which you can get me on a bit of Churchill.
But that's the point.
You'd have to say which bit you're talking about.
All right, let's do it ourselves. Joe Rogan, the world's most popular podcaster, and Douglas Murray, one of the Western's strongest intellectuals. Operation Unthinkable Churchill. So let's take a look at it. Operation Unthinkable was the name given to two related possible future war plans developed by the British Chiefs of Staff Committee against the Soviet Union during 1945. The plans were never implemented. The creation of the plans was ordered by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in May 1945 and developed by the British Armed Forces Joint Planning Staff. One plan assumed a surprise attack on Soviet forces stationed in Germany to impose the will of the United States and British Empire upon Russia. The will was qualified as a square deal for Poland, but added that does not necessarily limit the military commitment. The assessment signed by the Chiefs of Army Staff on June 9, 1945 concluded it would be beyond our power to win a quick but limited success, and we would be committed to a protracted war against heavy odds. The code name was now reused instead for a second plan, which was a defensive scenario by which the British were to defend against the Soviet drive towards the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean after the withdrawal of the American forces from the continent. When the Labour Party acquired power by the 1945 general election, it ignored the draft plan. The study became the first Cold War era contingency plan for war against the USSR. The initial primary goal of the operation was declared to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire. Even though the will of these two countries may be defined as no more than a square deal for Poland, that does not necessarily limit the military commitment. All right, so what's already popping out to me is that June 1945 is already super late in the war, right? So when was World War II in Europe over? May 8th, 1945. World War II in Europe officially. So this was in June. So this was after the war was already complete. So Operation Unthinkable, which the name is already unthinkable, according to Daryl Cooper, I presume, is that the United States and the United Kingdom was too willing to work with the Nazi army that they had just defeated in order to invade the Soviet Union after the war was concluded. Okay. And yeah, and so obviously with Nazi Germany taken out. Oh, hold on. This is going to be it. This plan was considered by the British Chiefs of Staff as militarily unfeasible due to an anticipated 2.5 to 1 superiority in divisions of Soviet ground forces within Europe. Most of the offensive operation would have been performed by American and British forces as well as Polish forces, and as many as 10 divisions of the German army remobilized from prison of war status. Okay, and what was the problem? What was the problem with this?
Comprehensive view.
Yeah, Churchill was never working with the Germans to invade Russia.
No. This is a plan that was drawn up.
Okay.
Do you know about Operation Unthinkable? Pull it up, Jamie. Operation Unthinkable was at the end of the war. I believe Churchill was concerned about the rise of Russia. In the rise of this.
Hold up. Let him cook. Let him cook. Okay. So I understand that. Let's put this in here, okay? So Douglas Murray is saying that Daryl Cooper is spreading misinformation intentionally in order to sanitize the reputation of Germany. Joe Rogan is saying like, okay, but one of the things that he talked about was this operation. I just read it. Let's see how Joe Rogan characterizes it, because it could be viewed as sweeping for the Nazis, but just because it might be sweeping for the Nazis doesn't make it untrue, right? You still have to deal with things that are true, even if they're inconvenient, right? Silver Jacket Man for $20 says, right, but Operation Unthinkable never actually implemented. It was a pro-war plan. Go back, United States color-coded war plans. We had war plans against Central America and France during the same time. Yeah, I don't care about war plans. Churchill thinking about taking out the USSR as the war wrapped up is not some indictment against Churchill. Like, if you thought it was an indictment against Churchill, then I think you're kind of a moron, right? Now, that doesn't mean that Daryl Cooper isn't playing morons, like he isn't, propagandizing morons, but we also need to be able to accept what's true, right? The way Joe Rogan phrased it made it seem Churchill is just using Nazis to attack Russia. Yeah. Let's, if you guys don't mind, let's rewind 1 minute. That way we can see the way that it's characterized before he explains it.
Soviet Union.
Use
the Nazis to invade. And this is the basis.
He and these other guys are all doing the anti-Churchill stuff now.
But he's not doing an anti-Churchill stuff.
He and the other people in the orbit.
Churchill was the author of this whole Operation Unthinkable, right? Where they wanted to use the Nazis to invade Russia. Wasn't that Churchill? Is that not true?
We're going to have to get into the weeds on Churchill. There's always going to be a corner which you can get me on a bit of Churchill.
But that's
you'd
the
have
point.
to, you'd have to
But
say
that's
what,
the point,
which
is
bit
to
you're
have
talking
a
about.
comprehensive view.
Yeah,
of
Churchill was never working with the Germans to invade Russia.
No. This was a plan that was drawn up. Do you know about Operation Unthinkable?
Thanks, Big and
Pull it
Gaming.
up,
I do
Jamie.
appreciate it.
Operation Unthinkable was at the end of the war. I believe Churchill was concerned about the rise of Russia in the rise of the Soviet Union, and the idea was, and we'll find out what the historical facts are about this. Operation Unthinkable, the name given to two related possible future war plans developed by the British Chiefs of Staff Committee against the Soviet Union during 1945. The plans were never implemented. The creation of the plans was ordered by the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill on May 1945 and developed by the British Armed Forces Joint Planning Staff in May 1945, the end of World War II in Europe. One plan assumed a surprise attack on the Soviet forces stationed in Germany to impose the will of the United States and the British Empire upon Russia.
Right.
The will was qualified as a square deal for Poland, but added that does not necessarily limit the military commitment. The assessment signed by the Chief of Army Staff on 9 June 1945 concluded it would be beyond our power to win a quick but limited success, and we would be committed to a protracted war against heavy odds. The code was,
This is okay. First of all, I never do Wikipedia.
Okay,
but
we don't have to do
okay.
Wikipedia.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
This is just what Jamie pulled up.
Okay, but first of all, yes, at the end of the war, a plan requested that wasn't seen through that suggests that after the defeat of Nazism, communism of the Soviet form is also going to be a threat to Europe was simply an evidence that, I mean, it's obvious.
True.
It's what Churchill worried about throughout the 40s. He worried about it in Yalta. He worried about it everywhere. I'm sorry, but I have to return to this point that this man manages to do one of the most heroic things in human history in standing alone against evil in its most concentrate form. And he does about as much as any human being can do to save the civilized world. If you just park that and you go on to a plan in 1945 to try to counter Soviet domination of Europe, you see what I'm saying? This is this is not doing something in the round.
Yeah, it's also, look, I mean, I'm not even like I'm not at all the expert on World War II. And
yeah, dude, it's sad. I'm a very small streamer, you know, kind of just starting out my career, and unfortunately I feel like I understand more about World War II dynamics than all these yokels who are multimillionaires for yapping for a living. That's kind of sad and embarrassing. So yeah, and Douglas Murray articulated my perspective almost perfectly, which is like, okay, Churchill had a plan in order to take on the Soviets after he had, you know, defeated Nazism. Okay, what's the problem, right? Now, here's the thing. All of our historical figures, I'm just going to share this with you because I think that you beautiful souls at home are going to be able to appreciate this. Every single historical figure you know about is a flawed human being, okay? They're a human being. They have impulses. They like alcohol. They like tobacco. They like women. They cheat on their wives. They go to war when they shouldn't. They ignore war when they shouldn't. Every single historical figure that you've ever read about has some big glaring flaw, either in their personal lives or in their professional lives. And one of the things that Churchill has that is going against him is what? Churchill Indian famine. The Bengal famine of 1943. And so y'all can read on this, but 800,000 people to 4 million people starved in Bengal, which is eastern India. Okay? I'm going to show this to you because I'm not even criticizing Churchill in like a major way because I understand the realities of the war. Let me pull up Google Maps India, or Bengal specifically. So what happened? Okay, let's pull this up. Japan invaded China. Let's go ahead and see. Did Japan invade Burma in World War II? Burma, 1941 to 1942. So the Japanese army was marauding in Burma, and their whole plan was effectively, they had a Lebensraum plan for this area, right? They had Lebensraum ambitions for like all of Asia. And so the Japanese invaded parts of Southeast Asia, but they also invaded China, and they were marauding, slaughtering civilians left, right, and center. And so there were people who were escaping the slaughters of the Japanese Imperial Army in Burma, which we just looked up. It was 1941 and 1942. Yeah, don't forget the rape of Nanking. Of course. Yeah, Japan did some truly heinous things that compare to the Nazis in brutality. Absolutely. This is not controversial to say, right? So the Japanese invaded this territory, and then hundreds of thousands of people fled into eastern India in order to avoid the conquest and slaughter of the Japanese military. And India said that, hey, they were part of the British Empire at the time. They told the United Kingdom, they said, hey, we have hundreds of thousands or millions of refugees, and if we don't feed them and house them, they are going to starve to death. And this was like 1943, right? And so what Churchill said is, hey, we are fighting an existential war for all of Europe right now. We cannot divert food supplies in order to take care of the refugees from Bengal. And so as a result, if they riot and they try to take your food supplies, then you fight them and you kill them if you need to, but we're not giving them food and shelter. We have to prioritize Europe. And people after the fact said the United Kingdom could have given the food to the refugees and have enough food to support the United Kingdom while it was at war. And so as a result, 800,000 people would not have starved to death, and the United Kingdom could have kept prosecuting the war. That's one of Churchill's great sins. So if you ever hear some like, didn't Churchill commit genocide in India? That's what they're talking about. But what they're really talking about is Japan invading, displacing hundreds of thousands of people, and Churchill could have fed the refugees, but he didn't. That's what happened. And so that's another element of historical revisionism where they're trying to take the sins of Imperial Japan, the consequences of the sins of the Imperial Japan, and then they're pushing it on to the leader of the free world at the time, which was the United States and Winston Churchill. And they're trying to say because he starved those people, he's just as bad as Hitler. And so this is the exact kind of historical revisionism that Douglas Murray is calling out. And you guys, as the consumers of content, need to be wary of. And when you hear propagandists doing these things, who did we watch? We watched Candace Owens do that for an hour. We watched her compare concentration camps to Japanese internment camps and make them morally equivalent. We watched her say that the bombing of Serbia in the 1990s and the Dresden bombing during World War II and the atomic bombings of Nanking and Nagasaki, not Nanking, excuse me, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they compared the slaughters of civilians in those incidents to all of the intentional slaughters of Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. So you need to know when you're being bullshitted, is what I'm really saying. So thank you for going down that historical rabbit hole with me. But this is exactly what Douglas Murray is warning against, where you can take the nefarious actions of our domestic governments and then make them akin to the worst atrocities that have been committed in human history. And the people who are doing that, they're not doing that because they're interested in some kind of like a broader version of the truth. They're doing that to minimize the sins of some of the worst criminals in human history and make them comparably less evil. So their public reputations can be sanitized in hindsight. Douglas Murray is 100% correct to be calling this out as bullshit. All right. Thank you for indulging in my rant. Let's get back to it.
And I'm not like going to debate with you about World War II, but I would say that
you probably should.
There's a lot of room for nuance and disagreement with what you just said. You know, in the 20th century, we had 2 world wars. They're the worst thing, objectively speaking, the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the world. And the Second World War is the biggest bloodbath in human history. And it ended with handing the man who you just mentioned, Joseph Stalin, half of Europe. So listen, if you want to argue, I'm
Hold up. I just need to point this out. If Dave Smith was alive in the 1940s, he would want to hand half of Europe to Stalin because it would be too bloody to pressure him to not be a murderous maniac. So Dave Smith making all these historical concessions to like the immediacy of World War II and how going after Joseph Stalin would have been good means almost nothing when he is toothless and clawless in the modern context of warfare. So don't buy, in my opinion, don't buy this like false humility and this false understanding of the dynamics of World War II when he would have been the exact kind of person who would have originally surrendered Europe to Hitler and would have secondarily surrendered Europe to Stalin. He is pretending to be the kind of person who understands these things in hindsight while he's committing the same appeals to pacifism that people did in the 1940s.
I'm Jewish and of German descent, so like I'm not against the argument that it was the Nazis had to be defeated and that was the most important thing, but there still is just the basic facts that it was a
thanks Spider-Man, I appreciate
couldn't have gone worse. It was like just a nightmare for civilization.
Exactly.
And if people want to look back at that and go, man, was there any other way this could have been handled? Was there any other way? Were there blunders that were made here? Now, personally, what I feel much more comfortable arguing would be that I try to blame everything I can on Woodrow Wilson as much as I can, because also he created the income tax on the Federal Reserve and did so much to damage my country. But I think American entry into World War I was really a disaster, and imposing the Treaty of Versailles on Germany was a disaster. I also think that's kind of fairly mainstream history. Like that's not a particularly controversial view that like imposing the Treaty of Versailles on Germany ended up in disaster.
Well, no, except that as Martin Amis said, the only way to not get to the Treaty of Versailles would be for Germany to win World War One. But yeah,
but we're not talking about the Nazis winning the war.
Sure.
We're talking about listen. I think that.
But secondly, sorry, I just have to address that fundamental. You say the outcome of World War II and everything that happened in it was the worst thing that's ever happened, and the worst thing imaginable, worst possible outcome. You said
just about.
You said worst possible outcome. Let me give you a much worse possible outcome. Hitler wins.
I'll be right back.
Right. Okay. Sure.
So it's not the worst possible outcome.
I mean,
that's true.
Listen, but okay, Hitler. Yes. Okay. I'm not saying you can't dream up a worse outcome. I'm saying what you
it's
have.
Not dreaming up. That's just what my country, Earth, and others went
but
through.
What did end up happening was 60 million people died, including the Holocaust, and then Joseph Stalin takes half of Europe. So okay, fine. I'll correct that. There is a worse outcome.
Right.
But that's not a great one.
No.
Okay.
And there's a very weird argument that you.
So I have a sneaking suspicion that Douglas Murray is going to say exactly what I'm going to say because he's not a moron. And this is actually my beef with Dave Smith and a lot of libertarians. They live in this dream world of like idealized reality where they're like, well, if only human beings listen to me and everybody like me, then we wouldn't have to have all these bad outcomes. And that's true. But power abhors a vacuum. And idealism is not a replacement for reality. And so if everybody in their heart of hearts was the perfect communist, then maybe we would be able to impose a moneyless, stateless, classless society. But human beings aren't perfect. They're actually quite like vicious and self-centered. And so as a result, we have to deal with reality as it is, where communism as a philosophy was one of the most murderous ideologies of the 20th century. And then same thing with like socialism or fascism. If we follow these if everyone who is in these societies follows these ideologies exactly to the letter, then you can bring about utopia. But we don't live in a world where human beings are capable of perfectly implementing the ideologies that they subscribe to. And so this like stupid naivete, this ahistorical, illiterate, dumb, ideological, annoying, pacifist, pusillanimous, Jonah Boy said earlier, which is long for P-U-S-S-Y. This pusillanimous, cowardly, tepid, vacillating perspective on like history and conflict and power it actually repulses me. It repulses me that these people have like an audience that they can cater to that thinks that, oh, well, if only everybody listened to me, then the world would be perfect. It's like, even if everybody did listen to you, the world would still be incredibly messed up. You dipstick, you moron. Yeah. Lol, thank you, says the Silver Jacket Man. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the dono. Big in Gaming says, could have gone worse if the UK stops fighting and the full weight of Germany goes against the USSR. Agreed. Jonah Boy says, I'm just sick and tired of these. I'm not an expert, but here's my dumb opinion. Exactly. Lido, I'm not an expert, but I know a lot of stuff, and I'm going to share everything I know with you. And if somebody says that I'm wrong, I'm going to allow them to say that I'm wrong, and then I'm going to ask them to substantiate their criticism. Lido Vexter says, I'll concede the Wild Edge case where the actual bad guys win. Lol. Yeah, it's crazy pants. Big in Gaming says, nah, instead Germany should have been let to take any country they wanted, Dave. Well, I mean, that's what he's going to argue with Russia, right? And please take my dumb opinion seriously. Yep. And if you call my opinion dumb, I'm going to get mad about it, right? John says, I want the world to be like Mass Effect without the Reapers. Is that so bad? No, not necessarily, but I think you're looking for some alien ussy, aren't you? Silver Jacket Man is so funny. I've always believed that the one reasons World War II is such a popular historical subject is because there was a clear right and wrong side. That's what made it compelling. Yeah, agreed. Along with the scale and along with the industry as well. Yeah. Xenocide and genocide are generally speaking bad. Slaughtering human beings for immutable characteristics is generally speaking pretty bad. So unless we're talking about like zombies, then slaughtering human beings for immutable characteristics is terrible. And there was definitely two forces that did that 100%. And there were definitely countries that were imperfect, but resisted their efforts to do that.
You know, hear about this. This attempt to revision this, and I know why it's happening.
I don't think there's anything that's revisionist.
I think there is. But this attempt to sort of say, look, you know, at the end of World War II, what have we got? Stalin has half of Europe. What was the point? And so on. That's going on. That's going on. And there are people who are feeding it. That argument is very similar. This particular school of, as it were, history is doing something that I've seen happen with American history as well, particularly with Lincoln. Lincoln's an interesting comparison to make with Churchill on this.
Yeah.
There are people who will criticize Churchill for mistakes made. Not hard to do. Quite hard not to make mistakes while fighting at a war of total annihilation against your country. People will say, oh, he didn't sort this out in 1945. You know, it's rather like Lincoln. He didn't solve every problem in the world for all time, but he solved a hell of a big problem for his time. And that requires some kind of generosity, of spirit and understanding in hindsight, as opposed to, I will find something that he did that I wouldn't have done, because if I'd have been running the British Empire in 1939, I'd have known exactly how to do it, and I'd have known how to hold the whole thing together, and I'd have kept Stalin back, and he'd have been great at Yalta. And this is...
But I don't think anybody's saying that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a tendency of like woke left kids to do this, but I don't think that's what certainly not what I'm saying, and I don't think what Daryl's saying. I do also think that one of the bigger... kind of the bigger picture dynamics to all of this is that.
So hold up. This is wrong. Okay. There's somebody saying that. It's the current president of the United States. He says, if I was in office, then all of the inflation wouldn't have happened. Now he is in office and he's doing everything to make inflation come back. We have someone who says the war in Ukraine would have never happened were I in office. He's in office right now, and Russia is currently violating ceasefire orders and failing to come to the table to negotiate a reasonable settlement. He says Biden was a weak and dumb person, therefore that, the Middle East and North Africa would be more secure, and October 7, 2023 attacks would have never happened. Well, guess what? He's in office, and Iran right now is trying to build up their nuclear armaments. So, no, they can't say no one is saying this. The most powerful person in the world has this exact mentality, and nefarious characters are appealing to his fans using the exact same rhetoric. So no, I'm with Douglas Murray right now. I think that Dave Smith and I think that Joe Rogan are being useful idiots. Now, I like Joe. I think Joe's an earnest character. Honestly, like I think that Joe Rogan, he's not there probably isn't a bad bone in his body. He literally tries to do the right thing as best he can. Dave Smith is probably earnest, but I think I'm just going to be real. I think he has Dunning-Kruger. I think he thinks he's smarter than he is, which is fine. We all think we're smarter than we are. But I think that if you're going to come to the table and argue about complex geopolitical events, and then you're going to say, oh, my World War II history sucks, well, then it's like, okay, well, you don't know anything, really. And it's not because you have to be an expert on World War II, but World War II, like somebody was saying in chat earlier, is one of the most interesting historical events ever because it actually has a lot of gray morality, but it also has a lot of black and white. And so if you are incapable of articulating the black and white parts of the morality, why would we trust you to explore the gray? And so that's where I feel like Dave Smith is failing in his own position as a political commentator who doesn't take himself seriously, but simultaneously does.
We have, at least since 9/11, been in a state of perpetual war. And all of these wars have been disasters. They have been so many lies involved in selling all of them. I mean, the whole Iraq war, the whole war in Afghanistan, just lying the whole way through. I mean, I remember literally having conversations with Green Berets in the middle of the war in Afghanistan, and they're like, George W. Bush is telling you that the army we're building up there is really successful. This thing's going to fall in a week without us. And then all through the Obama administration, it's just like lie after lie after lie with disastrous wars. And so this does.
Okay, Dave Smith is a fucking moron. Sorry, Ken. Sorry to the folks at home. Sorry to my mother. Okay. Sorry for using the F-bomb. My bad. But I need to explain this to you. And I'll pull up a map real quick. Again, I hate this guy. I hate how stupid he is. It's actually infuriating. Google Maps. All right. We're doing it. We're doing it, History Bros. History Bros should have a good time, and they should have a good time correcting me when I get things wrong. You should have a darn good time, okay? So what happened was, this is the place with the world's largest proven oil reserves. This is the place with the world's like second or third most proven oil reserves. Matter of fact, the top three, there's me, lol. The top three is Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. That's where a majority of the world's petroleum is. Kuwait also has a shitload of petroleum. So what happened in the 50s, 60s, something like that? Iran used to be a very strong global trading partner when it comes to petroleum. We do a little geopol. All right. So Iran was one of the world's largest traders in petroleum, but the socialist government led by a gentleman named Mossadegh wanted to nationalize the oil, meaning that they would kick out all of the Western style speculators who were making billions of dollars per year, and they would nationalize the oil. So all the profits would go to the state. And so what happened was they were trying to depose the Shah of Iran, who was like the king. And the United Kingdom and the United States went into a joint venture in order to maintain the rule of the Shah. And they effectively did a coup inside Iran in order to maintain their king. And their king was an authoritarian, right? Which is, he was a modernist, meaning that he wanted his people to have access to, like clothes and music and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, he was an authoritarian. If you were a jihadist in Iran and you opposed his rule, he would kidnap you, torture you, put you in the gulags and all that kind of stuff, right? So what happens in 1979 is that there's a pro-democratic but also pro-Islamist revolution in Iran. And the Ayatollahs, the holy rulers of Iran who are currently in power now, they seize power, and the Western world loses a third of its access to the oil reserve of the planet overnight. And Iran becomes a proxy of Russia and China, where instead of being the free world's oil reserve, they rotate to the Soviet Union, which still existed at the time, in China. Okay. So what ends up happening is Saudi Arabia is very nervous about that. And so is Iraq. And Iraq, in the ensuing chaos, was led by Saddam Hussein. They try to take some oil-rich areas in eastern Iraq and western Iran, but then they start getting their butts kicked. So the Iraqis start losing. So the United States, because we're responsible for a substantive amount of the oil reserve in the world, we start exporting weapons of mass destruction to Iraq. We sell them in the 1980s. You can substantiate this by something called the Rigel Report. We sell them dual-use technologies like anthrax, botulism, the precursors for VX gas, the precursors for other like nerve agents and biochemical agents. And then CIA operatives actually go in here and they tell Iraq, who is under Saddam Hussein, how to use those weapons of mass destruction so they don't lose the war. And then Saudi Arabia is threatened by the Iranian military. So Iraq survives, but they have this dictator named Saddam Hussein, who's an a-hole. And Saddam massacres some of the Shiite rebels and Kurdish rebels in his own city with weapons of mass destruction. And then he also launches weapons of mass destruction into the state of Israel, and he invades Kuwait. This is all under George Bush Sr.'s leadership, and George Bush has Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney as a part of his administration in the late 80s and early 90s who deal with the Kuwait invasion. For those of you who don't know, that was like our big war in the early 90s, was the invasion of Kuwait. If you want to watch a movie about it, watch Jarhead. So what ends up happening is we, despite selling weapons of mass destruction to Iraq in the 80s, we kick them out of Kuwait and then we isolate them politically. And so they sit there for a decade. Well, what ends up happening is some dickhead named Osama bin Laden, who's from Saudi Arabia and who has rich friends in Saudi Arabia, and he fought in the war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. He blows up the World Trade Center in New York because he views the American support for the Saudi Arabians and for Israel as evil. And then he runs away to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Well, what happens is all the people who were involved in selling Iraq weapons of mass destruction, they use the previous sale of weapons of mass destruction to justify our invasion of the country. And so while we're invading Afghanistan, in order to justifiably go after Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda network, we also invade Iraq in order to try to restabilize the nation, make it a loyal partner of Saudi Arabia, and also eliminate all the weapons of mass destruction that we sold to them in the 1980s. Boom. I just gave you like a geopolitical history lesson that you will not find very many places that accurately summarized probably 30 to 40 years of major events. And so Dave Smith is such a dipstick that he thinks that because the story is complex, people lied. It's like, no. The Bush government probably did lie about some things, but they told a simplified truth to the American people because the American people are largely stupid as hell. So anyways, I'll leave it there. I could give you more, but I'm going to leave it there for now. Raymond Smith says, bring it on. Well, you're welcome. UAE also, Connor. Well, this is an entire oil-rich region. If you're like, hey, Connor, this country also has a lot of oil, I'm going to be like, yeah, of course. Socialists don't know how to make money with oil. Agreed. That's why losing Iran was such a big deal. Also, for the record, Iraq plus Saudis are Sunni. Iran is Shia. Historically, these two sects get along like Catholics and Orthodox in the Balkans. True. Contra FDN says, love me some Geopol. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome for some Geopol. So let's do a Sunni Shia map. And for the record, Saddam Hussein was Sunni, which was an ethno-religious minority in Iraq. And the majority of the country is like 60, 70% Shia, which is why that's why a Shiite government is currently in control of Iraq, was because it's the second most populated place with Shiite Muslims. All this green stuff is largely dominated by Sunni Muslims, whereas this is dominated by Shiite Muslims. So, yeah. People say like it's too broad, it's too general of a concept to assign religious relevance to the conflicts. However, it does, in my opinion, seem to be a decent way to easily analyze why people are fighting where they're fighting. So example, look right here. Here's all the Shiites. Here's all the Shiites. The part of the reason why Syria is such a conflict is because a lot of Shiites are reliant on, or were reliant on, the Assad regime for their sense of security. And then the Shiite Iranians are also backing the Houthis, who are a Shiite minority in Yemen who have taken power. So you can say that it's not relevant. I think it's perfectly relevant. If I saw Protestants and Catholics fighting consistently, like in Ireland, then I think it would be perfectly fine for me to say that the reason why they're fighting each other, the reason why the Catholics in West Ireland and South Ireland are fighting the Protestants in Northern Ireland, isn't because they're Catholics and Protestants. But if you wanted to divide up the tribal groups, then that's a perfectly fine way to divide up the tribal groups. But we love a little geopoll. We love a little geopoll. Well, thank you, Jack of Lantern. I appreciate it. I hope you like the stream. Contra FTN says that they love them some geopoll. Jack of Lantern says that they love some geopoll. Well, then I hope that you guys are kind enough to scroll over to the like button and click it so other people know that we're live and they come to hang out with us as well, so they can appreciate my masterful geopoll analysis. Big in Gaming says people in the late 90s were saying that Iraq had WMDs that weren't just Bush. Yeah. But Big in Gaming, my point to you would be that we knew that they had WMDs because we sold them WMDs in the 80s. And we presume that they continued their WMD program because that is how Saddam maintained power. He maintained power through the fear that he would launch VX gas or anthrax or botulism against his domestic and foreign adversaries. That's how he maintained power. So we presume that he continued the development of his weapons of mass destruction. Anyways, be sure that you like the stream. If you have money burning a hole in your pocket, feel free to donate. If you like my geopoll analysis, then please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell because we will have more for you going forward. All of that being said, we are going to continue on with the Dave Smith segment and we'll get it cracking. So let's take a look.
Create a fertile ground for people to say, I wonder if they were lying about all these wars.
Sure.
Again, I'm not really trying to argue with you about World War II. I'd rather argue about these wars today.
I think the interesting question is whether you're busy watering it.
Well, should you not talk about mistakes that were made overall?
Absolutely.
Okay, you should.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm all for going back and looking at mistakes.
So what is your argument then?
It's a very weird thing to go back, zone in on a man, say this one thing is a mistake and should characterize him, and you ignore everything else.
You're taking him out of context when you're talking about Darrow, who's done, what was it, 30 plus hours?
So what? 30 plus hours of podcasting. You do that in a week.
UFC 314 is headed to South Beach, and it won't be all
Okay. We don't need your ads, Joe Rogan. Thank you kindly.
It's a very different thing.
He's not doing a podcast like talking to people.
Okay, nor is he doing scholarly work, nor is he working in the archives, clearly. Come on. I mean, he is not the historian of our era.
He's not claiming to be.
This is the thing, Joe. This is like punching jelly.
No, but you don't consume his work.
What I'm saying, because I don't need to consume endless versions of a revisionist history. I understand.
But it's not revisionist
from.
history. If you listen to his work, it's not revisionist history. He's basing it on historical work.
I know. But okay, so this is my point about jelly. It's a shape-shifting thing. Comedian or historian?
He's not a comedian.
Historian or podcast? Would-be historian or actual historian? You say he doesn't claim to be a historian, but he's pumping out tens of hours of history.
Does Dan Carlin. He doesn't claim to be a historian either.
You see my point about the move. It's like some weird jujitsu move.
No, I don't.
Where you say, hang on, you know all about this as well. You say, I'm not a historian, but I'm going to spend my time talking about history. I'm not a journalist, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. It's a weird move, yeah?
No.
You don't think?
No, I'm a free American. I can talk about what I like to.
About
so
what
I don't. So what is the point
I've
here?
noticed you can, but
so
we
what's
all
the
can.
point?
The point is, what are you pushing? What are you watering?
What am I pushing?
Yes.
Liberty, free markets, peace, prosperity, not getting in another stupid catastrophic war, which we're on the precipice of right now. That's what I'm pushing.
What are we on the precipice of?
Well, I think weren't you just talking about it the other day? Everyone I hear on the inside says we're about to attack Iran. I think you just said something about that the other day. Am I wrong about that? I thought I saw in one of your interviews that you did.
Possibly.
No. Okay.
That doesn't mean we are on the verge of a war. I mean, you keep referring to we being in wars. There's a very big difference between a country having a military that's engaged and a country being at war. This country has not been at war for 25 years. You have not been fighting for the American homeland for 25 years.
Yes, we haven't. That's true.
Right.
We haven't had a war on our shores. We've been picking on third world countries halfway around the world.
Well,
Dave Smith, you moron. All right. I'm not going to bust out the maps, but I'm just going to share this real quick, okay? So, picking on third worlds across the world, all right? What happened in Afghanistan was we invaded and we deposed the Taliban, which was the reigning government at the time, and we worked with the Northern Alliance and the Afghan national government. They were so incessantly corrupt that they were almost impossible to work with, okay? In Iraq, we actually did stand up the Iraqi army. We actually did train a healthy chunk of Sunni and Shiite militias to be a part of the government. And we did secure some level of peace before ISIS broke off and did its thing. And then it was actually the semi-competent Shiite militias and central government who did retake Iraq and have stabilized it to the point that it's been. To the point that I've been on YouTube chats with Iraqis, like people who live or currently have family in Iraq. And they have said that the post-ISIS era is way better than the Saddam era. So 100%, and they'll blame the war on the United States 100%. They'll say, oh, it was the United States' fault that everybody was killing each other and we had this horrible civil war and this, that, the other. It's the U.S.'s fault. We never, would have done it if it wasn't for the U.S. But at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation, they'll admit that modern Iraq is infinitely preferable to the Saddam Iraq, right? And so pretending that we went to Iraq in order to just bully Iraqi civilians is crazy pants. We went there, we deposed an authoritarian dictatorial regime. We excuse me. We worked with local forces in order to build them up. And then once they were fighting a civil war, we picked a side and we supported that civil war until they were able to establish a country. In Afghanistan, it didn't work, but in Ukraine, we're doing the same thing. And I guarantee you that Dave Smith is against Ukraine as well, even though there's like a clear moral superior in Ukraine. And so what I don't like is the toothlessness and the clawlessness of these people, where they're like, oh yeah, it's good that America gained independence. It's good that we have freedom of conscience and freedom of speech. It's good that I have the right to free speech and free expression and the right to self-defense in a government that's governed by its own rules. But I won't support it anywhere else except for in my own state and in my own country. It's like, okay, you're a pussy. I'm just going to say it. You're pusillanimous. All right. You're weak. You're weak-willed. You haven't sacrificed anything for anybody else. You're pusillanimous. Okay. So I think Dave Smith is pusillanimous and he has local moral virtues that he doesn't export anywhere else. He doesn't believe that his worldview is actually good, because if he did, then he would support it being spread. But he doesn't. Kay says it's the same brain rot America bad but from the other direction. Yeah, it is America bad. Spider-Man says Dave Smith is such a cuck. I'm going to go ahead and read that chat because I agree with it, even if it's rude. Spider-Man says, I love the game these guys play with this stuff too. Compare how they talk about the United States and then Russia. Oh yeah, they have all the energy for all of the bad things that we've ever done. But whenever we're talking about Russia and them, I don't know, rocket attacking a Palm Sunday church service and killing 36 people, then it's like, oh, well, we shouldn't have antagonized them with NATO. It's like, okay, so you carry all of your energy for like other countries voluntarily joining the defensive alliance, but you have nothing to say about Russia burning through 35 civilians for no military benefit. Got you. You're actually a piece of human garbage. Understood. No problem. Whew. All right. We're going to continue. I think I forgot to take my medicine this morning. I'm going to go pop it real quick because I'm getting a headache and I think I need it. But I'm going to play and I'll be back in 60 seconds.
You haven't been randomly picking on them. I mean, Afghanistan, you went...
I didn't say it was random.
Yeah, right, okay. It wasn't like you suddenly decided to bomb, again, Myanmar or something. We went for Afghanistan to find bin Laden and take revenge for 9/11 and stop an attack like that happening again on the American homeland. That is very different from a country being at war.
Yeah, but that's a total mischaracterization of the war in Afghanistan. It's one thing to say that might be an accurate characterization of the special operations mission in late 2001, but then we fought a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban.
Because you got dragged into the quicksand of war.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, fine. But
fine.
I thought it wasn't a war. Like, what? I don't get your argument.
No, I said it was a war. It's your use of we, as if you're personally like suffering this war. I mean, you're
yes,
taxpayer.
when I say we,
we're taxpayers,
implied,
so we pay for it. Okay, fine.
Douglas, would you go, if I went back and corrected you on every time you've used the term we to refer to your government or something like that? Like if I were to say, oh, we just imposed tariffs on China, would you point out that I didn't and it was the Trump administration?
You take it obviously very personally, and that's your right to do so, of course. I'm just trying to make sure we're accurate here.
What do you think I'm taking personally?
Just that, the American wars.
Sure. Yeah, I think they've killed hundreds of thousands of people and cost my country $8 trillion and degraded my country very much.
And there's a very good argument to make on that. I'm still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something.
You don't have to be. You don't have to be. But
so
this is like
issue?
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute,
I'm
what
not
about
an expert, but I'm talking all the time about.
But
this
you're not
thing.
even talking about specific.
Yeah, this is where Douglas Murray might lose me a little bit. It's totally fine. I'm sorry if I missed the past minute. I'm assuming that Dave Smith would have triggered another geopolitical analysis out of me, but that's okay. I'll save you guys the rant about whatever his mischaracterization of history is. I'm just going to assume that you took all the psychic damage that you need to. With Douglas Murray, though, entertainment is its own level of expertise, and entertainment is often justified by its own success. So Joe Rogan might not be an expert in history, philosophy, psychology, war, CIA, whatever, but he is an expert in entertainment. And so what he does best, I think he actually says this in this podcast, is he says that I don't think about, how is this going to affect broader discourse? I think that this would be an interesting person to talk to. That's Joe Rogan's expertise. And then when it comes to Dave Smith, I don't have much respect for his ideological analyses. However, his expert is talking about world events from a libertarian lens, and no offense to any libertarians in chat, but it's fairly like an angry stoner, right? It's like a stoner who doesn't want to share his money. There are oftentimes like tech bros who make a lot of money who think that anybody can succeed, but they also want to be the ones who decide where their money goes. They don't want the government to decide where their money goes. And so they're oftentimes like really competent within a technical field. However, they also don't think that they have any like moral obligations to anyone else, or at least they don't believe that they have any compelled moral obligations to anyone else. So yeah, the point is that Douglas Murray is going to lose me because you're allowed to be an entertainer and not take yourself so seriously that every interesting person you talk to is a qualified expert in a field. And sometimes it is entertaining to just yap. And there are people who are incredibly charismatic and fun to talk to who are actually morons, right? They're actually dumb. But I think that Douglas Murray is primarily going to argue like, okay, but you're mainstreaming some of the worst people on the planet and you're giving them no pushback. That would be where I would go. I wouldn't moral frog about the fact that they're talking to the worst people on the planet. I would say that they're poorly equipped in order to contend with the worst ideas on the planet. And then they're also not asking experts to be on the show in order to contradict the narratives of these nefarious actors, right? Kay says, I think Douglas Murray is trying to say they are being weaselly and unaccountable for bad takes or bad info by hiding behind not being an expert. I mean, I agree. I think that's exactly what he's saying. Jonah Boyd says, they think they just fell from a coconut tree. Yeah, true. Base Kamala meme and don't exist in the context of what has been and aren't cognizant of what could be. For those of you who don't know, the Kamala campaign, as stunted as it was, had some like pretty funny like Karen memes where they had these like, female like girl boss memes that if you took them ironically, they were actually pretty funny. And one of the things that she said was, I didn't just fall from a coconut tree. And she was just trying to say, like, obviously her existence is not random. That was the point of that comment. And then she kept saying, like, dreaming about what could be, unburdened by what has been. And they try to make it like, oh, this is like a Marxist saying. And I don't think that's entirely correct, but I do find it to be like utopian. And so I hated that saying. But Jonah Boy incorporated that perfectly into a reply comment about holding Joe and Dave Smith accountable. And that was a good meme. That was a good meme. Anyways, we are looping a little bit, but this is probably the hottest conversation, and we haven't gotten smoked by copyright claims yet. So I do kind of want to keep going with it because I'm only going to be here until 2:45 because I have an all hands meeting for Valor at 3. And so I'm gonna take a break at 2:45 and then go to that meeting. And then, to be honest, I can't promise that we'll be back. I might take the afternoon, or it might run for 90 minutes, so I might not be back. But I did want to sink my teeth into this content, and I feel like between the 3 segments, last show and this show, we should at least have our teeth sunk into this content pretty deeply. Silver Jacket Man says true, but if you ask a comedian like Bill Burr about a political joke he made, he will be the first to say, "I'm a dancing clown, don't listen to me." I don't think Dave Smith does that. Yeah, he really does do both simultaneously. He says, I don't claim to be an expert. And it's like, yeah, but you're offering your opinion and you should be able to back it up and stand on bit. You know what? I think this is the best way to say it. Douglas Murray is asking them to stand on business. And I think that Joe and Dave would be better off if they did. I think Joe can say, I'm a curious, dumb guy, and so I invite the most interesting people on the planet in order to perceive them and perceive what they believe about the world. And I don't necessarily care whether or not they're correct or not. I more care that the conversation is interesting and it offers a new perspective on the world. That's totally fine. Joe Rogan could stand on business in that capacity. When it comes to Dave Smith, I think he needs to say, like, listen, the reason why I don't claim expertise is because actually, if you look at my academic and geopolitical background, there's not anything particularly impressive, but I'm wildly passionate about liberty and libertarianism. And so I've been advocating for my political ideology in the public space for a decade. And so while I don't claim any expertise, I'm very passionate about these principles. And I think Douglas Murray could say, okay, fair enough. I just think you guys are useful idiots for people far more nefarious than you. This conversation could have been done in 5 or 10 minutes, but obviously that wouldn't be good content. So anyways, let's see what else has to be said.
Specifically on what he just said.
No, I'm saying this is my point about this. You say, I'm not an expert.
So what's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
Well, the expert class hasn't done a great job.
I know.
Man. This is follow the science. Yeah, but you know what?
Oh, Dave jumps on the rake immediately. He's like, listen, all the experts were wrong. It's like, dude, so you're saying that your opinion doesn't matter because you're not a credentialed person in a field. And then he says, well, listen, all the credentialed people have been wrong anyways. And that's why Douglas Murray keeps accusing him of being like jelly in the conversation. 100%. Big in Gaming says, how many dumb Pierce Morgan panels has Dave done to talk about Israel-Palestine? Yeah, he wants to be an expert. 100%.
I agree with that. I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right, I know.
But
so
one
Douglas,
of the problems
during
is,
all of COVID, I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. I'm glad to do that. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates and talking about
was
the lab
the argument
theory?
At the time. You realize
that's the entire argument that you're making. Let the experts handle this.
No.
You're not an expert. You're right. I was just a comedian.
You're wildly not listening to what I'm saying. I think you have to take. I think we should agree perhaps on the following, that one major thing can break down in front of your eyes, or many major things. And it does not mean that every single one of the sewer gates should be lifted. Okay?
What? Yeah, I get that point.
Right. Who's saying it should be?
I'm saying this is the chatter on what is part of our side at the moment, is that a lot of the sewer gates are being lifted, sometimes by people who know that they're doing it, sometimes by people who don't, sometimes by people who say, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. But at the very least, there's some damn hygiene that should be required, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but
I think this is Douglas Murray's fault for presuming that he could break through to Dave Smith and Joe Rogan when they are the people who are lifting the sewer gates unknowingly. So in the metaphor, Daryl Cooper is the sludge that is being held back by the gatekeepers of intellectual like normalcy in society. And yet there are people who are like, oh, well, we were partially correct about COVID. And by the way, this is like the really funny thing about Dave Smith too. He's like, I'll put my record up against anybody. And I almost guarantee you that if we go back to his tweets, and I would love to have a conversation with the guy, frankly, but if we go back to his tweets and we take a look at it, I almost guarantee you that he's making all these things where it's like, the federal government is using COVID as a pretext in order to seize additional power. And as we all know, the government, once it takes power, it very rarely gives it back. Like even, let's presume that he said that, or you can presume that he didn't for the sake of the conversation. There are plenty of libertarians who said that we were all going to be in FEMA camps, that we were going to be socially isolated to the point that like we weren't allowed to resume normal society. They said that the federal government was never going to give this back. They said that vaccine passports were here to stay. They said that we were going to be, eventually we were going to be like digitally chipped and all our stuff was going to be tracked. They said that we were going to be stuck in 15-minute cities where we would have to ask permission in order to leave our 15-minute cities. So Dave Smith probably individually said like 5 or 10% of that. But as a movement, the libertarian group, the group that's skeptical about power, they all said that. So if you look at what the experts got right, we could put it at like 70%, correct, with like 30% having like glaring flaws in it. Whereas I would say the libertarian camp had like a 90% incorrect rate as far as like the lockdowns and the federal government never giving power back and people getting chipped and moved into 15-minute cities and this, that, the other. So yeah, so Dave Smith saying that I have a good record. It's like, okay, so you are an expert then, or you want to be one, right? So you want to be one. You just don't want to be a part of the quote unquote expert class, the credentialed class, but you want to be a person that people take seriously and that people consider your opinion when they're evaluating circumstances. Of course he does. Of course he does. So he wants all the privileges of being an expert without the burdens or consequences of being an expert. So I understand the punching like jelly analogy. Jonah Boy says, I don't need expertise, bro. I just need weed. I'm smarter when I'm high, bro. Just trust me. So true. Silver Dragon says, yeah, he's trying to contain the outbreak, and the other two are driving the monkey to the airport. Yeah, pretty much, dude. Pretty much. Kay says they don't believe experts don't matter. They think experts matter for pilots and medical professionals. They just don't believe that this is important enough to see it as entertainment, but they would never admit seeing it as entertainment. Yeah, exactly. Jonah Boy says, and the only talking about chipping people's brains is Elon, and that guy, and that's their guy, so they ignore it. True. Dinas Montas says these people have millions of followers. They need to be held to a higher level of responsibility. Well, so for instance, I don't think that anything needs to change legislatively, right? I think something needs to change culturally. And so the cultural thing needs to be Douglas Murray, since he's Dave Smith's and Joe Rogan's friendly acquaintance, despite being viciously opposed to them in this context, he needs to say, hey, listen, there was actually a lot of misinformation presented by Darrell Brooks. I think he's a nefarious actor. I would like you to talk to this charismatic historian who's going to write down a list of all the misinformation that Darrell Brooks said and then walk you through all the info. And considering both of you guys have extremely large platforms, I would sincerely appreciate it if you had a conversation with this person. And then he uses his social clout in order to intelligently debunk a nefarious actor. That's what should be done in a liberal society, in a free society. I don't think that anything needs to change like legislatively. Douglas Murray needs to call them out in this conversation, but then he needs to help facilitate the propagation of good information. That would be my assessment.
Sure.
Just that. Let's have a bit of hygiene on our own side, not lift every sewer gate.
And when you say our own side, you mean the right wing broadly speaking?
Broadly speaking, and I'm sort of funny about libertarians. I'm never quite sure. I always say I think libertarians are essentially the bisexuals of politics. They should just choose, Joe. They should choose. It's kind of
true.
They just want everything at the buffet.
That's very funny.
Well, I think we want some things. I don't know. Okay, that's a weird way to put it, but I get
see your point.
All right. Well, I mean, I don't know. Look, I mean, essentially, I just don't. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. But if your argument is that, like, you're saying I claim to be an expert, but then I have like a parachute to get out of it by being like, hey, I'm just a comedian who's just saying this. Yeah. But I don't think I've ever like really claimed to be an expert. I have opinions on things.
I know, but but
because I'm interested in these topics.
Yeah, I know. But isn't it weird to go around, for instance, I mean, let's get to the last year and a half. It's a bit weird to be simultaneously saying I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere.
I don't think so. Not really. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't think like I don't see how you
can't
have
talk about these things.
Which things?
All these things that we're talking about.
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert?
I am on some, yes.
On some,
but you talk about some that you're not an expert on.
You'll notice
so
that
what should you do? What should you do if those subjects get breached?
Well, I think that you educate yourself as much as you can.
Shouldn't you say I'm not an expert and then give your opinion if you're in the middle of a conversation?
I think it's, as I say, I think that it's a weird move to say I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it nonstop. I think that is strange.
Listen, I will certainly concede that I am weird. So I'm not disagreeing with you. It's weird that I'm as obsessed with all this stuff as I am. I mean, like, okay, I'm a weird guy. I tell jokes at nightclubs and then get obsessed with politics and monetary policy and like, okay, fine. But I just like fundamentally disagree with this idea that, which I really do think is quite anti-democratic in spirit and quite elitist, that there's an expert class. They can have opinions on all of these things. It's weird for any regular person who's just read about it.
Not my view. Not my view.
Seems like what you're saying.
I conceded already. I said a long time ago that I believe much of the expert class let itself and us all down very badly. And I think that happened in foreign policy in areas. Not every area, but it happened in some areas. I think it happened with COVID in many areas. But that does not mean that it's just a free-for-all. No. There are some things we can still verify to be true and can still agree on as baseline levels of agreement in a free society. And yes, everyone is free to air their views, but it does not mean that everyone who sounds off on an issue, whether it's World War II, the war in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, has an equally valid point of view. No.
I certainly wouldn't argue.
Okay. I'm fine with this, but Douglas Murray needs to articulate what now, right? That's like the main thing is, okay, so Dave Smith and Joe Rogan allegedly have platformed somebody who was a nefarious actor. They did not realize that he was a nefarious actor. They were useful idiots for him to spread his message. Now what, right? And I think that if Douglas Murray was smart in this portion, he would jump ahead to that because he would say, I would like it if you talk to this guy, because I think this guy could clear up a lot of the misinformation while still being charismatic, interesting, and entertaining. And then what's interesting is him saying libertarians are the bisexuals of politics. You need to pick a side. I agree, but I would literally I would classify myself almost as like a libertarian status, but I've moved away from that as I've engaged in more and more knowledge of power. I think that the rights of individuals is one of the most important and interesting parts of our Constitution and our republic. And I think that starting from the individual, if you have healthy individuals, you can create healthy families. And if you have healthy families, you can create healthy societies. So I think focusing on the individual is actually like an okay way to analyze politics. Like I forget who it is, but I think it's Ayn Rand or someone like that. They say that the smallest minority in any society is always going to be the individual. And that's an appeal to human rights, where if you have good individual human rights, then you effectively have really good protections for all minority groups because there is no minority smaller than the individual. I actually like that a lot. I think that's pretty smart. But being, what Joe Rogan and Dave Smith are effectively asking for is like, what's the code of conduct or rules of engagement or etiquette for an expert versus a layman? Because in American politics and in American domestic society, everyone's expected to have an opinion. You might notice that on social media. The reason why everybody posted like Black Lives Matter or the black boxes, or they posted like the rainbow flag during Pride Month or something like that, is because you're expected to have an opinion about everything. Now, a lot of people don't want to have an opinion about anything and they just want to live their lives, and they should be left alone. But it's kind of expected that if somebody asks you a question about politics or money or how you should live your life or something like that, especially in an American context, you're expected to answer it. So Dave Smith is saying this is anti-democratic and elitist. I agree. I just think that the demos is broadly not very intelligent and or well read or well researched, and I am somewhat of an elitist. But I think the elitists can be smug dirtbags who think they're smarter than they are, and therefore, like, elitism has to be checked by democratic and liberty-based criticism. Then foreign policy and COVID are two concessions from Douglas Murray that the expert class got it wrong, which is cool. And then, but there should be baseline levels of agreement in a free society. Well, I think in a free society, you have to establish and then defend the baseline levels of agreement. So if you're going to say Churchill actually isn't that bad of a guy, then you need to be able to articulate, like, these are the things that legitimately Churchill deserves criticism for. And these are the things that I think we need to concede to some level of reality and truth. And if you can't articulate that, then I think you're kind of failing in the argument. And so I wish Douglas Murray would push on, number one, where people need to go, like for etiquette. And then number two, I think he needs to, if he's going to say like, oh, this is all hogwash, then you need to articulate how. Big Jonah Boy says he's not weird, he's stupid. Well, he definitely says some dumb stuff sometimes. Big in Gaming says Douglas should have pointed out the stupidity of Cooper blaming Churchill for the war starting. Exactly. Raymond Smith says, dang, can't type. That's what I'm saying. Okay, cool. Well, that's what I'm saying. There we go. Let's continue for a bit longer.
I mean, that to me is just batting down a straw man. I mean, I certainly wouldn't argue that everyone has an equally valid point of view, and I certainly wouldn't argue that there shouldn't be some standards of like who you would want to find interesting and talk to and who you wouldn't. But also, it's like, so let's have the conversation that, like, I don't know, like if there's if there is if there are experts out there who can smack all of this stuff down or just destroy every point that I make over the years or whatever, like, okay, so then do it. And then let's see.
Yeah, I know, but, well, that's a bit weird because also then it's like the debate me bro thing. But
you just criticize Daryl for not debating.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I know. Let me just make the main point. I think what I'm trying to get at, Joe, is that it's a bit like the Twitter algorithm thing, which is, yes, everyone is and should be free to say what they like on Twitter, apart from whatever the very fringe things of like immediate incitement to violence and all that kind of thing. But we all know that one of the oddities of Twitter, including since Elon took over, is that what you hope is a restored marketplace of ideas ends up pushing you really crazy shit.
Yes.
And that is what I'm suggesting is happening on a podcast level and maybe on a wider level beyond that. I get stuff on Twitter I just do not want. I do not want a guy with 1,500 followers who's got some zany new view on something, who isn't an expert, but is an expert, to be pushed at me. And effectively, what is happening with the Twitter algorithm is happening everywhere else as well. And we're all for the open marketplace of ideas. I want that. I thrive in it. But it is different once you get into the thing of, is something manipulated?
Yeah, so somebody, Cameron Mosley says, dang, was not ready for an Ayn Rand quote. Listen, there are different ideologies that have kernels of truth in them. That's what people cling to when they're being criticized. We watched Jordan Peterson talk about biblical masculinity being the example of the shepherd, where a shepherd is strong enough to fight off predators, tough enough in order to survive in the environment, and nurturing enough in order to take care of the vulnerable. That is the ideal masculinity in the Western world based off of the concept of a shepherd. Jordan Peterson could overdose on benzodiazepines tomorrow and then attack all of his neighbors with a machete and get murdered by police. His assessment of biblical masculinity in like conceptualized as the shepherd is not going to be destroyed. And so here's Ayn Rand. The smallest minority on earth is the individual. Those who deny individual rights cannot claim to be defenders of minorities. So this is an well, sure, Cameron, but I'm sure there's people who dislike when a good quote comes from a bad source, right? So the small Ayn Rand has plenty of crazy takes, and I think a lot of really aggressively cringe people will base their entire personality off of Ayn Rand's books. That they'll think that they are the vaunted libertarian class that's going to save society through entrepreneurship and ingenuity, right? And so that's cringe, but this statement will be true with or without anybody else disliking Ayn Rand's books. So I like the statement. I think the statement is great. I think I'm a communitarian conceptually, which means that I think that the individual and the collective are in constant battle over who is in charge. And so there are individualist aspects of society that need to be defended, but there are also collective duties that need to be enforced at minimum culturally, if not legally. Right? If we're all libertarians and we're all voluntarists, meaning that we only do things without compulsion, and then we get invaded by another society that's authoritarian, and all the volunteers don't fight for the liberal society, and then the liberal society is wiped from the face of the earth, that is more evil than having a draft. Having a draft that actually secures the free society against authoritarians is less evil than letting freedom be wiped from the face of the planet because of cowardice. Kay says, I'm not sure, but Douglas Murray is doing the round promoting a new book. It's possible he didn't have much notice on this debate. Yeah. Of course. It's always easy, like, you know, as a criticizer, as a YouTuber, as someone who watches other people's content and then needles it, it's always easy to pick on the lack of preparedness of other rhetoricians. But the truth is that if we go into a debate, you're going to catch me flat-footed every now and then because you can't know everything before you roll into a debate. I'm just saying that it would have been good if he knew what Daryl Cooper was provably full of shit on. Excuse my French, Ken. Excuse my French, Mom. But if he knew that before the debate, and then he effectively made Dave Smith and Joe Rogan look like useful idiots in the conversation, I think that would have helped his point substantively. That's the main thrust of what I'm saying.
Manipulating the algorithm behind. Is the algorithm being pushed on me? Why am I being given this? Why am I not being given that? Why am I being constantly pushed this view? And I think that the answer to a great degree is the same thing in your world as it is in the Twitter world, which is if you go straight online and you say, you know, JFK file drops, watch live stream of Kennedy historians reading the papers live, you're not going to get any views. No one's going to watch it. That's what's needed is for the people who know the documents to go through the documents. But you and I know that if, as there was some guy who did immediately, you do something like live stream Mossad involvement in JFK, you're going to milk it. You're going to cream it online.
True.
The money comes in. I'm saying that there's a similar algorithm in all of our lives that we're not as aware of as we should be, which is that because we all know this at some level, that there are certain things that get a bit of your base going, or get people going interesting and crazy, and then they start debating it and all that sort of thing. And that algorithm of online seems to be spilling into the real world.
I don't disagree.
Not only is this fundamentally true, but Dave Smith and Joe Rogan have effectively made their careers on platforming crazy ideas. But it's crazy because it's compelling, right? What he's pointed out is a part of human nature. So Dave Smith kind of asked, like, what are the standards by which we identify experts, and why don't experts do their jobs of criticizing fringeoids? And I think that Douglas Murray, without really answering the question, kind of does, which is it pays to be insane. I could full cam right now. I could rip my shirt off and I could scream about the Jews and scream about, Mossad and JFK and all that kind of stuff. And I would probably lose half of you, but I would go on to live stream fails or lolcow or something like that. And while it would be negative attention, it would be a way to get attention immediately. And so the more fringe you are, the easier it is to get popular very quickly. I think the thing about the truth is that it needs some time to catch up, but I think there needs to be some defenders of the truth or some people who care about truth in order to watch fringe people and check them. I hope to be one of those people, and I appreciate you fine folk at home watching this content and hopefully supporting that mission. Karen Mosley, we agreed on that. Val says, identified as a libertarian back in my college late teen days, Ron Paul days. I joined the military, and that was it for me taking libertarian seriously. Me as well, because a mildly authoritarian or authoritarian society is always going to beat out a libertarian society. A rawly volunteer society is one in which very important things don't get done and they get taken over by people who have more coherence and deference to power. Cameron Mosley says, have you ever listened to Yarn Brook? I have not, but if you DM me some books or something like that, obviously we get more full-time, make more money, get a bigger audience, etc. I will be looking for like more research material and ideas to contend with. Jonah Boy says Wild Factor gets views, unfortunately, which is fine. Like, honestly, we could talk about Destiny's sex life for the next hour, and I could probably boost the numbers by another 20 or 30 viewers if I was talking exclusively about who did Steven have sex with and who got angry that he had sex with another person and who is upset that I am insufficiently upset about Destiny's sex life, right? We could boost the numbers. Yeah, see, Ninja Physics says, please no. Exactly. So the point is, though, that we're all here to be entertained, but how we get entertained ultimately does matter. So I would rather talk about, Destiny's sex life every now and then when it's relevant and it's interesting and there's a cool development in Twitch and YouTube politics. I would like to talk about it then. I don't want to talk about it at all times, because if you talk about it at all times, all you're going to do is you're going to attract low IQ dipstick dummies who only care about the sex lives of, D-list E-celebrities, right? And I'm not trying to say like Destiny D-list E-celebrity. I'm just trying to say like, the E-celebrities are probably on the lower totem pole of E-celebrities, right? Sapien Green says, I don't know if there's a large overlap between your audience and reality TV enjoyers. You say that, but at the same time, I almost guarantee you, if I talk about, Vosh's sexcapades or Destiny's sexcapades or Bo Blacks or any of those commentary people, commentary people are savage, man. They are constantly looking for the next person who is having a sexual or drug-related or violence-related downfall. The Silver Jacket Man says, please don't. I never cared about any of the Destiny stuff. Well, I appreciate you fine folk who are more into geopolitics and political philosophy. I appreciate you brave souls. I do. We're getting close. So Ninja of Physics says, well, he would be in the D list, assuming we're listing this alphabetically. True. I would say that Destiny would be in the A to B list for online streamers, but streamers themselves are D list E-celebs. That's what I would say. So he's in the A list of his niche, but he's in the D list of who is popular on the internet. So, all right, let's dig in a little bit more. And then I think around, 5-10 minutes or so, we're probably going to wrap up just so I can go get ready for the meeting. But I parasocially love you for being here. Please like the stream. That way other people know that we're live. Please super chat if you have the money. If you don't have the money, don't worry about it. Your viewership is more than enough. And then also just, I don't know, have fun. I don't know how to say it. Cameron Mosley says, Yarn Brook is an objectivist that talks about news from an individualist view, and he's really dislikes Trump, very pro-free market. Interesting. Well, yeah, I have no problem contending with, schizos, and I'm not calling him specifically a schizo, but ideologically pure people with no compromise do tend to be interesting subjects of criticism. Big in Gaming says, Dave Smith is really weirdly too comfortable with hanging out with Jew-hating folks online. Yeah, I think he probably, since he's like part Jewish, like ethnically, I think that he says like, oh, well, I'm a Jew, so they can't hate Jews that much. Matter of fact, let me double check it in order to make sure that I'm not talking, random shit without being correct. Is Dave Smith Jewish? Let's check. Smith has 2 children with his wife, Lauren. He is Jewish and has stated that he is the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. Yeah, so he's probably... He probably justifies hanging out with neo-Nazis who are saying crazy shit. He probably justifies that by saying like, well, I'm Jewish, and if they're willing to have a conversation with me, then they can't be that big of bigots, right? Or even if they are bigots, then it's worth going onto their platform. Yeah.
Agree that there's certainly more sensationalist stuff will get you more clicks. I also don't think it's not really unique to social media or podcasting. I mean, this has been
believe
true.
me, I write for the tabloids.
Yeah, right. This has always been true. Right? So,
exactly.
Yeah, okay, so it's kind of one of the problems
I
of
don't think
humanity.
anybody's arguing against that. It's certainly never my intention when I talk to someone to try to get more views. It sounds crazy, but I'm only talking to people that I'm interested in talking to. And in Daryl's case, it's because I've been a listener of his podcast for years. That's it.
Raymond Smith says, "Hey guys and gals, Scott Mann put the call out for help. See you on the hill. Good show." Thanks, Raymond Smith. Appreciate you. We'll catch you in the next one. Big in Gaming says he does the Finkelstein of using his family to defend him, saying crazy stuff. Yeah, kind of, but I think he's also Jewish.
This is like genuinely how I perceive things. Well, that's why you're here. I'm genuinely interested in your views as well, even though you completely disagree with him. This is the marketplace of ideas in real time.
I agree. Although, as I say, I think you've massively underrepresented the pro-Ukraine argument and the pro-Israel argument in the last 2 years.
I don't know. I mean, well,
that's my observation.
Okay, you're totally allowed to have that observation. What's the pro-Ukraine argument that you think is not being represented enough?
Well, my broad view is that, again, something to do with the algorithm, that anything that is conspiratorial about Zelensky or the...
Whoa, Big in Gaming. You said Jocko Willink did a podcast with Daryl Cooper. Wait, does a routine podcast or did one show? That's kind of crazy pants. Jocko Willink is like the king of SEAL podcasters, right? What do women owe men? My Valor needs to figure out the posting schedule. It's fine. Posting when I'm live is fine. I shouldn't be so sensitive about it, but they need to have a set schedule. Then, Jocko Willink, Daryl Cooper. So his oh no, Jocko, the military veteran who's reliant on doing tons of intel on his enemies, forgot to do intel against his interlocutors. Whoops. Platformed a Nazi apologist. Whoops. Didn't challenge him on his previous pro-Hitler statements. Whoops. Lol. And again, I don't have a problem with Jocko having Daryl Cooper on, but instead of like mainstreaming him and letting him talk about more normie shit so people can like get into his podcast and then he can red pill them in his own space, you should probably exclusively talk about like, hey, you said some wild shit about Nazi Germany and Winston Churchill. Let's talk about that. I have a Churchill and World War II historian here who's gonna, have some questions for you. That's funny. This just shows you that even the biggest names are total morons. And I include myself in that description. Like, you get into alternative media and it's fun. You put out a few banger videos, people like the content that you do, and you kind of get like an inflated ego of who you are and how important you are. And I'm sure that's happened to all of these people who are wildly successful. Like, look at Jocko. Jocko gets, 200,000 views. He's got 2 million subs. This is the YouTuber podcaster dream. Look at this art. He's very clearly like super self-serious. Now, I'm sure he's self-deprecating every now and then as well, but he's very serious, right? And so, you need to, I would advise Jocko, if you're going to platform a Nazi without like, a Nazi apologist, without having the intelligence to figure out who they are and what they're all about and then challenge them on it, maybe you should take a humble pill. That would be my recommendation. Kay says Jocko is the person Daryl was talking to about Churchill, saying he was the villain. Yeah. No. We're aware who Daryl is, but I think it's funny that Jocko kind of stepped on a rake right there. That is who Daryl is not being hyperbolic about. Right. 2. Exactly. Kay says the podcast was back in 2020, so maybe predates some of Daryl's tweets. Yeah, maybe, Kay. I agree with you. I don't want to hold him like too hard, like to too harsh of an account, because the standards with which you hold other people to account are the standards with which you will be held to account. So I agree with you guys. But, you know, at the same time, I do think it's funny that Jocko, Navy SEAL, American patriot, I wake up at 4 a.m. I put rocks in my boots. That way my day is harder. I go do 2,000 burpees and then I run 10 miles. And then I drink 2 raw eggs before I go on to my podcast. And then when I'm done with my 2-hour podcast, I write a book for 16 hours a day. And then I read books for another 4 hours a day. And then I get 2 hours of sleep and then I do it again. You know, since that's Jocko Willing's character, I do think it's funny that he platformed a Nazi apologist. I did just screw up the video, but it's not a big deal. I think we're wrapping up anyways. It's 2:43 time on deck. I got an all hands meeting with Valor at 3 p.m. So it's gonna be exciting. It's gonna be a good time. So I'm actually pretty stoked to go meet with some of the bosses over at Valor and talk about logistics, back end, thumbnails, all that kind of stuff. So I do appreciate you brave souls coming and hanging out with me today, but we're probably wrapping up. Oh, Kay says it's definitely still a yikes. Only 2, right? Ninja Physics says. Contra FDN says, have a great day, the rest of you. 07. Well, thank you kindly. So I'm going to salute all you brave souls. I'm going to shout my own stuff out, and then we're probably going to wrap. Sorry for the short day today, but it is we are having too much fun. We're having too much fun. So let's remove this. Let's go full camera. And just a shout out to kind of wrap up the segment. So in my opinion, that's probably the last time we're going to watch the Dave Smith, Douglas Murray segment, only because we already did 2 previous segments and we need to stitch it together, right? In summary, I would say that Douglas Murray is coming on the podcast in order to accuse Dave Smith and Joe Rogan of being useful idiots for nefarious characters. And then they're asking for substantiation of that and how they should conduct themselves. I don't think that Douglas Murray has done a good job of saying how they should modify their behavior, but I think that he has repeatedly said the one takeaway that he did have, that's my alarm from my meeting, lol. One of the things that he did say repeatedly that they have not acknowledged is like, okay, if you're going to talk to paranoid schizophrenics about geopolitical issues consistently, then maybe you should have some experts on as well in order to balance the information and also criticize these people. Also, if you have somebody who's like a schizo alternative Nazi apologist person, and that person is unwilling to debate somebody who would massively contradict with their ideas, then that should be at minimum be a red flag for whether or not they're full of shit. Which I think those are perfectly fine, criticisms. I think that Douglas Murray is broadly correct. I think it just rubs my and Dave Smith and Joe Rogan's American-centered opinion that we are all free citizens of a free country. We should be able to discuss whatever we want when we want to. It should not be like a huge issue for us to have like contradictory and crazy conversations about fringe ideas. And if what needs to happen is those bad ideas need to be defeated in the marketplace of ideas, then that's just what needs to happen. And the experts need to step up and be charismatic and intelligent and rhetorically gifted and come out and defeat the nefarious Sewergate people, as Douglas Murray put it so eloquently. So Dinas Manta says, peaceful sky for all. So true. John says, thanks. See you next time. Appreciate you. Don't drink too much. I won't. Have a great rest of your day, says Contra FDN. All right. Parasocial love to you and yours. Thank you for the donations that we did get. Thank you to the Silver Jacket Man in particular with the high dono of $20. And I parasocially love all of y'all, and I expect to see you in the next one. I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye for now.